Marshall Peak, Chapter 54:19, Dense Fog Celestial Phenomenon. Yang Kai wasn't even sure if he could survive a royal lord's pursuit for several months, let alone a whole year. However, it was already the best solution he could think of. Regardless, his plan had been derailed, for he had lost his way. Everywhere he looked on this vast late ancient era battlefield, everything looked the same, so he couldn't tell where he was or where he should head. Initially, he was still confident he was moving in the right direction, but he had been interrupted by the sheep-headed royal lord on several occasions when using instantaneous movement, which resulted in him reappearing in random places. Now, he wasn't even sure which direction the no-return pass was in. Left with no choice, he could only keep activating his space secret technique to run for his life, for the other party seemed determined to destroy him. Nevertheless, things were only getting worse. As Yang Kai traversed this late ancient era battlefield, regardless of how careful he was, he couldn't avoid getting hurt by the dormant restrictions and divine abilities. For the past month, he kept getting injured, so instead of healing from his wounds, his injuries had turned worse. As though realizing that Yang Kai was at a dead end, the royal lord became even more ruthless. Yang Kai knew that if this dragged on, he wouldn't be able to persevere for long. However, it was unlikely that he could get rid of this royal lord. As he was running away, he gritted his teeth and looked in a particular direction. Over there, a gigantic cloud of fog covered a vast region of the void. Although Yang Kai was many millions of kilometers away, the fog bank still looked enormous. It was a celestial phenomenon. Years after the humans set off on their crusade, they came across a lot of different celestial phenomena that came in a myriad of forms and sizes. Regardless, all of them shared a common trait: they gave off a dangerous vibe. Yang Kai had not explored any of those celestial phenomena. On the other hand, old ancestor Xiao Xiao had barged into one on a whim a while back, but when she returned, she refused to say what she had seen inside. She only said that it was extremely dangerous, and even a ninth-order open heaven realm master like her was at risk of losing her life if she remained inside. Therefore, as those from Great Evolution Pass crossed this place, they would always make a detour whenever they came across a celestial phenomena lest they fall into mortal danger. No one knew how these celestial phenomena were formed. Perhaps it had something to do with the clash between the humans and the Black Ink clan in the late ancient era, or perhaps they were naturally born. The humans knew little about this area of the void behind the royal cities. The celestial phenomenon that looked like a fog bank was the only one Yang Kai could see right now, and he had no idea how dangerous it was. However, it wasn't like he had a choice now, as he was pursued by a royal lord. If he couldn't find a way to turn things around, he would just be waiting for death. Even if there were some dangers within the dense fog celestial phenomenon, they were the least of his concerns. Apparently, the royal lord saw the dense fog celestial phenomenon as well, and there was a hint of doubt behind his gaze. Yang Kai had seen quite many celestial phenomena, but it was the first time the royal lord came across one, so he had no idea what it was. Regardless, when he saw Yang Kai heading towards the dense fog celestial phenomenon, all of a sudden, he understood the latter's intention. As he quickened his pace, the distance between them shortened. However, the seventh-order boy was just too slippery. When his opponent was close enough, he teleported and disappeared once again, widening the gap between them. After using the same trick several more times, Yang Kai reached the dense fog celestial phenomenon. When he scanned the celestial phenomenon with his divine sense, Yang Kai was surprised, for he couldn't feel any danger from this dense fog. It was very strange indeed. The celestial phenomena he had seen in the past all exuded dangerous auras, but this dense fog celestial phenomenon appeared somewhat special. At that instant, he wasn't sure if he should be worried or happy. If there was really no danger in the dense fog celestial phenomenon, it would be safe for him to enter it. However, he also wouldn't be able to make use of this celestial phenomenon to eliminate the royal lord. With that said, things had come to such a point where there was no turning back. Having made up his mind, Yang Kai crashed into the dense fog celestial phenomenon. Following that, he realized that something was off. He couldn't detect any danger when he was outside the celestial phenomenon, but once he was inside, he immediately found himself in a perilous situation. An ominous aura engulfed him, like death itself. At that moment, all his hair stood on end as he activated the power of his small universe and raised his guard as high as it would go. Outside the celestial phenomenon, the royal lord was stunned. That was because he lost track of Yang Kai the moment the latter entered the celestial phenomenon. The brat named Yang Kai seemed to have entered another world, as even his divine sense was unable to penetrate the fog and find out what was going on inside. After a moment of hesitation, he, too, dashed inside. The next instant, he was baffled by what he saw. Yang Kai was indeed in the fog, but at this moment, he seemed to be battling against an invisible enemy. His world force burst forth, and his golden blood spattered. Within a breath, he was completely battered. As a dragon roar reverberated, Yang Kai even transformed into his 70,000-meter ancient dragon form. Still, he was unable to ward off the danger within the fog, as even his dragon scales were being blown off. The royal lord was perplexed as he had no idea what was going on. However, he didn't have time to ponder on it. Just like Yang Kai, the moment he stepped into the fog, he was deluged with an enormous sense of crisis that came at him from all directions, which prompted him to madly push his black ink strength. Soon, he realized what Yang Kai was fighting against. There seemed to be immense pressure that was intent on crushing him to death. Certainly, he wouldn't stand idly by and wait for death to come. He immediately activated his power to push back against the fog. At the same time, he tried to leave this area. What shocked him was that, even though he had moved backwards a long distance, he still couldn't escape the fog. He had just entered this dense fog celestial phenomenon, so he should have been able to leave by taking a single big step back. However, as though a mysterious force had sealed off this space, he was unable to escape. The pressure around him intensified, and left with no choice, he could only surge his power to resist it. From the corner of his eye, he could see that the 70,000 meters ancient dragon had stopped moving and now hovered in the distance. Half of his dragon scales were gone, and his entire figure was soaked in blood, making him look totally battered. Seemingly having lost consciousness, Yang Kai reverted from a dragon back into a human. Is he dead? The royal lord found it hard to believe. He had been chasing after this human for so long but hadn't managed to kill him, yet now, this brat had lost his life just like that. At that instant, the royal lord had some conflicted feelings. Regardless, he wasn't in the mood to find out whether Yang Kai was dead or alive because he realized he had come across the biggest crisis of his life. If he couldn't find a way out, and soon, he would be accompanying this human to the Yellow Springs. A long time later, Yang Kai finally regained consciousness and immediately realized some energy fluctuations were coming from a nearby place. Instantly, he recalled what he had gone through before he blacked out. To shake off the royal lord's pursuit, he barged into a dense fog celestial phenomenon and faced a mysterious attack. He tried his best to resist the pressure coming from all directions, but in the end, he was in so much pain that he passed out. He still hadn't figured out what it was in the fog that had attacked him. Although he was equally puzzled why he was still alive, he hurriedly circulated his power and kept his guard up. The next instant, his expression darkened. Here it comes again. Just a dozen breaths later, he once again passed out due to the pressure coming from all directions. Before that though, Yang Kai caught a glimpse of the battered royal lord who was not far away. He seemed to be fighting against an invisible enemy as well, the energy fluctuations Yang Kai felt earlier obviously coming from him. He's a royal lord, after all. I'll pass out again soon, but this guy is still engaged in an intense battle. He's simply more powerful than I am. When Yang Kai woke up for the second time, he once again felt energy fluctuations nearby, and they were even more violent this time. He hurriedly turned his head and saw the royal lord casting a divine ability. Black ink strength billowed from his body and turned into a gigantic illusory phantom before it covered him like a protective film. At this moment, the royal lord was in a sorry state. He was badly wounded and his aura was unstable while he was covered in dark blood. Seeing that, Yang Kai snickered. It was indeed embarrassing that he had blacked out twice, and he didn't even know who his enemy was. Regardless, it seemed he had made the right decision by diving into this dense fog celestial phenomenon. At the very least, the royal lord had also suffered a setback. But soon, Yang Kai became doubtful. He had passed out twice, so if there was really an invisible enemy in the fog, Why hadn't it seized the chance to kill him? Moreover, as he carefully reviewed what he had gone through, Yang Kai found that the odd pressure didn't feel like a kind of attack. Instead, it was like an automatic response, similar to the effect of some arrays. Quite a number of arrays could do the same by reflecting one's own strength to wound them. After giving it some thought, Yang Kai decided to not immediately make any moves. He just secretly activated his power and kept his guard up. Just like what had happened previously, he felt pressure coming from all directions. The last time, he subconsciously tried to resist and push the pressure away, but this time he didn't make a move and instead let the pressure do as it pleased. He still felt some discomfort, but it was bearable. Still, even this mild force had irritated his wounds, causing him to gasp. After remaining still for a moment, Yang Kai realized the pressure didn't intensify. As he pondered on it, he stopped circulating his world force entirely and completely relaxed. Just like he had expected, as his power dissipated and he became at ease, the pressure coming from all directions diminished and eventually disappeared. Upon that realization, Yang Kai was dumbstruck. There was no invisible enemy in this fog. In fact, he was his own enemy. Although he had no idea how this dense fog celestial phenomenon was formed, he believed that it was similar to a powerful reflection array. The pressure that came at him was actually caused by him. As he let his power go, the pressure also vanished. Yang Kai was torn between tears and laughter as he realized that he had blacked out twice because he was essentially bludgeoning himself. As he glanced at the royal lord, who was still fighting against the dense fog celestial phenomenon, Yang Kai felt a bit better about himself. At least he wasn't the only idiot in this place. Marshall Peak, Chapter 5420, Neither Can Kill. Upon figuring out the dense fog celestial phenomenon's secret, Yang Kai darted his gaze around while continuing to lie in the same position. As he never activated his power, the fog around him remained calm. Next, he examined his body and couldn't help feeling sorry for himself. In summary, his condition was terrible. Before he was hunted down by this sheep-headed royal lord, he was already badly injured. Then, during the pursuit, he was repeatedly struck by this royal lord and his injuries exacerbated after he entered this dense fog celestial phenomenon. His 5 viscera and 6 organs were a mess as they all nearly exploded. About 70% of his bones were broken and there were even sharp bones stuck out from his flesh here and there. Half of his dragon scales, which were originally hidden under his skin, were gone. If he transformed into his dragon form now, he would be half naked. Fortunately, despite his serious injuries, he wasn't at risk of losing his life. Coupled with his own restorative power and his potent dragon vein, he was actually on the mend. He stealthily stuffed some spirit pills into his mouth and took a glance at the royal lord, only to see that the other party was still engaged in an intense fight. Amazing divine abilities and secret techniques were cast from the royal lord's hands as his fight against the fog seemed to have turned the entire universe upside down. That guy is really dumb. Yang Kai was gleeful. However, it wasn't until he blacked out twice that he realized the secret behind the fog. The royal lord still hadn't passed out after persevering for such a long time, so it wasn't surprising that he hadn't discovered the truth yet. Anyone who fell into danger would instinctively counterattack to save themselves. Who would have thought that in this dense fog celestial phenomenon, doing nothing was the best way to protect oneself? The more one attacked, the more perilous their situation became. Maybe he'll exhaust himself to death, Yang Kai hoped. However, his wish wasn't to be granted. Just like what happened to him previously, the royal lord was unable to fend off the pressure despite going all out. He kept roaring and releasing his black ink strength until he had no more energy left and finally passed out several days later. As soon as he became unmoving and all the noise in the dense fog celestial phenomenon died down. Staring at the unmoving royal lord, Yang Kai knew that the other party wasn't dead, so he was naturally disappointed. Nevertheless, he soon pulled himself together and gazed fervently at the royal lord. His eyes were filled with murderous intent. Since this guy is unconscious and exhausted, maybe I can kill him now. As soon as Yang Kai began gathering his power though, he realized he felt the pressure coming from the fog again. The more he exerted himself, the more powerful the pressure became. Soon, he released his power, as he realized his idea wasn't feasible. The dense fog celestial phenomenon was extremely sensitive to any foreign power. Before Yang Kai could gather the necessary strength to kill the royal lord, he would pass out again. Left with no choice, he could only gather his world force on his palms and test the response from the fog. He tried to adjust his energy fluctuations to reach a kind of balance. Then, he slowly wriggled his arms as though he was swimming towards the sheep-headed royal lord. However, Yang Kai found himself to be outrageously slow. 2 whole hours passed, but he only managed to cross half of the distance between them. Another 2 hours later, Yang Kai arrived at a place that was 100 meters away from the royal lord. He slowly summoned his azure dragon spear and pointed it at the royal lord's neck. Then, he squirmed and stealthily inched closer to him. During the process, the balance he had been trying to sustain was almost shattered. Fortunately, he managed to dispel his power in time and let the fog calm down. He then approached his target again. Watching as the azure dragon spear was about to stab into the opponent's neck, Yang Kai felt his heart thumping in his chest. Perhaps the royal lord was shocked by the murderous intent, or he indeed had an incredible restorative power, but he opened his eyes all of a sudden. Seeing that, Yang Kai forcefully extended his spear. Black blood spattered as the razor-sharp azure dragon spear was even able to penetrate a royal lord's robust body. His spear jabbed right into the opponent's throat and was about to stick out from the other side, but just then, the dense fog celestial phenomenon launched a counterattack. Instantly, Yang Kai felt immense pressure coming at him. His wounds split open, and as he faced enormous resistance, unable to extend his spear one bit, he couldn't help but curse. As a sharp pain shot through him, the royal lord came to his senses and turned his head, only to see Yang Kai stabbing a weapon into his throat. This brat is still alive. The royal lord was startled. When he saw Yang Kai looking battered and unmoving earlier, he thought he had died. To his surprise, not only had Yang Kai survived, but he had also seized this chance to try to kill him while he was unconscious. If the royal lord hadn't woken up in time, he very well might have lost his life. Enraged, the royal lord released his aura as his black ink strength burst forth. Why, before Yang Kai could even get a word out, his expression had darkened as the pressure coming from all directions intensified many times, causing all the bones in his body to crack. He couldn't help but spray out a mouthful of blood, and following that, he blacked out and lost consciousness. The royal lord extended his hand in an attempt to kill him, but his hand was forced to stop just a meter away from Yang Kai, and he was unable to push it any further. His expression changed. Ignoring Yang Kai, he surged his power in an attempt to shake off the restrictive force. However, the force became so immense that he soon fell into a state of despair. 3 breaths later, his eyes rolled back into his head and he too passed out. Without the disturbance of foreign powers, the fog soon calmed down. When Yang Kai awakened, he saw the royal lord hovering somewhere near him. This guy had passed out, but his hand still remained stretched out towards Yang Kai. Seeing that, Yang Kai knew what the other party intended to do after he blacked out. After hesitating for a bit, he gave up on the idea of killing this royal lord. The royal lord indeed looked like he was powerless to resist now, but based on the previous experience, Yang Kai believed that the royal lord would regain consciousness the moment he made a move against him. A royal lord's sense for danger was extreme, so any external threat would undoubtedly wake him up. Moreover, the reflective power in this dense fog celestial phenomenon was savage. Yang Kai had to activate his power if he wanted to kill the royal lord, but if he did that, he would be the one who would suffer. Before he even managed to kill the royal lord, he would pass out upon getting squeezed by the pressure. In this damned place, neither one of them could kill the other. In that case, Yang Kai reckoned that his best option for now was to flee. Since the royal lord was still unconscious, he had to try to leave the dense fog celestial phenomenon. Perhaps he could return to the battlefield and join the war again. Making use of his previous experience, Yang Kai carefully activated his power and infused energy into his hands. Then, he flailed about as he awkwardly swam away from the royal lord. Half a day later, the royal lord also regained consciousness. This time, he didn't immediately make a move. Instead, he remained still and fell into his thoughts. It wasn't until Yang Kai blacked out twice that he found out the dense fog celestial phenomenon's secret. Since the royal lord was not a fool, he certainly could do the same. If there was really an invisible enemy in this fog, the two of them would have died after falling unconscious. Since he and the human brat were still alive, something was obviously off. A moment later, the royal lord also figured out the secret behind this dense fog celestial phenomenon. As he scanned his surroundings, he soon spotted young Kai swimming away from him. After giving it some thought, he imitated young Kai and infused some of the power into his arms. Then, he started swimming in this fog. Detecting something, young Kai turned his head and saw the royal lord running after him. He couldn't help but curse, "You're a stubborn one, aren't you?" Both of them were in a sorry state, yet this guy hadn't given up on the idea of killing him, leaving young Kai vexed. The royal lord snorted as his eyes reflected young Kai's figure. Slowly, he followed behind young Kai. Even if we get into a life-and-death battle here, it won't affect the war between the two races. I'm just a seventh-order human, so it's pointless for you to kill me. Why don't we bid each other farewell here? We'll meet again if fate brings us together in the future. With a cold expression, the royal lord remained unfazed. Young Kai kept persuading him by saying, "You're a royal lord, so what's the point of you making things difficult for me? If you spare my life now, I'll spare yours in the future. Who knows? We might even be friends." However, the royal lord remained silent. "It's not like you'll be able to reach me, so stop wasting your time. I can see that you're horribly injured, so why don't you recuperate now to prevent your injuries from becoming worse?" Seeing that the other party totally ignored him and refused to back down, young Kai grew incensed and said through clenched teeth, "Injured Black Ink clansmen have to recuperate inside Black Ink nests. You're badly wounded now, so I guess you can only use half of your strength right now. On the other hand, I'm different. My wounds are healing quickly, and I'll be energetic again in a few days. Chase after me all you like. When we leave this place, let's see which one of us will die." When the royal lord heard that, his expression changed slightly. Young Kai had a point. The royal lord indeed needed a Black Ink nest's help to recuperate, and given how wounded he was, using half his strength would really be his maximum. He was already unable to capture young Kai when he was at the peak of his power, so now that he only had half of his strength left, he probably wouldn't have a way to deal with this tricky opponent. Nevertheless, he was still a royal lord. He had personally made a move against a single seventh-order boy, yet after such a long time, he was the one who ended up in a horrible state. He was simply unresigned. As for young Kai's threat, that didn't bother him one bit. Even though he was only left with half of his power, that was still significantly more than a seventh-order human could hope to handle. He could even deal with an eighth-order master with ease in his current state. If young Kai had the guts to make a move on him, he would be the one who would suffer. As the royal lord squinted his eyes, he said, "Pass me the last thing Kang gave you and I'll leave." A helpless young Kai sighed, "Will you believe me if I say that old man never gave me anything? That was his way of diverting all your attention away from him so he could use that strange jade. It's laughable that you all believe it to be true." The royal lord sneered while relentlessly pursuing him. A frustrated young Kai roared, "It seems that you don't believe me. Forget it. It's not like there's anything I can do about it. Just chase after me all you like." Without speaking further, he tried to control his power and strike a balance with the fog. As he waved his hands, he swam further away. Somewhere behind him, the royal lord imitated him and pursued him, the two of them swimming forward ever so slowly. Marshall Peak, Chapter 5421, Breakthrough. There didn't seem to be an end to this vast dense fog celestial phenomenon, so young Kai wasn't even sure if he would have a chance to leave. Fortunately, being in this celestial phenomenon, both he and the sheep-headed royal lord didn't dare to activate too much of their strength lest they draw a counterattack to themselves. In this way, even though the royal lord was significantly more powerful than young Kai, it was unlikely that he could capture him. 3 years, 5 years, 10 years. The human and the royal lord were still swimming in this dense fog celestial phenomenon with no end in sight. Young Kai even suspected that this dense fog celestial phenomenon also had the effect of a bewildering array, otherwise, he should have left this place after swimming in the same direction for 10 whole years despite his slow movements. He was initially anxious and fidgety, but he gradually became as calm as a tranquil lake. His original plan was to make use of this dense fog celestial phenomenon to get rid of the royal lord and return to the battlefield to fight against the Black Ink clansmen. However, 10 years had now passed, so the war should already be over. Who won? Did many humans lose their lives? Was the Black Ink giant spirit god with only half a body killed? Yang Kai didn't have the answers to any of those questions. At any rate, since he was in a trap, it was pointless for him to think about those things. The most pressing issue for him was that he had to leave this dense fog celestial phenomenon as quickly as possible. His wounds had all healed after 10 years of recuperation, and he was at peak strength again. On the other hand, the royal lord was still wounded, as without a Black Ink nest, it was hard for him to recuperate. Regardless, Yang Kai was irritated at the fact that the royal lord still followed closely behind him. It wasn't easy for him to get rid of the other party either. This dense fog celestial phenomenon had significantly restricted their movements, and the royal lord was determined to hunt him down. Unless he had a way to kill this royal lord, he was helpless to shake him off. After 10 years of exploration, Yang Kai had figured out more secrets about this dense fog celestial phenomenon. As he activated his demon eye of annihilation, his left eye turned golden, allowing him to see through all falsities in the world. In this way, he was looking for a way out of this fog. The royal lord, who was following closely behind him, helplessly discovered that Yang Kai was inconsistent in the ways he moved around. There were no regular patterns to speak of. Finally, there came a day when Yang Kai suddenly spoke to his partner behind him. "Hey, can I have a word with you?" The royal lord said smugly, "There's no need to beg for mercy, unless you're willing to pass me the thing Kang gave you." A helpless Yang Kai refuted, "I told you that old man named Kang didn't give me anything, but you just don't believe me. Forget it. We've been trapped in this celestial phenomenon for 10 years, and there isn't any hope of us getting out if we keep blindly stumbling around. Recently though, I've discovered some traces of regular patterns in this fog. Perhaps I'll be able to find a route to leave this place." Instantly, the royal lord's face stiffened as he quickened his pace. Despite noticing it, Yang Kai was unfazed. "Relax. Given my current ability, it's unlikely I'll be able to leave here. Therefore, I need to cultivate for some time. You don't want to get stuck here forever, do you? If I can find a way out, it'll be beneficial to you too." A myriad of expressions came over the royal lord as he wasn't certain if Yang Kai was telling the truth or not. Nevertheless, Yang Kai had a point. If he could find a way out, both of them would stand to benefit. The royal lord was equally vexed being trapped in this damned place. Even though they both had thousands, if not tens of thousands of years left to live, there would eventually come a day when they passed away if they remained stuck in this place. "You want to cultivate?" "Yes. How do I know you won't seize this chance to break through?" It was already so hard to deal with Yang Kai when he was just a 7th Order master. If he managed to make it to the 8th Order, the royal lord wasn't confident he would ever capture him. Yang Kai was rendered speechless for a moment, then said, "It has only been several hundred years since I reached the 7th Order. How is it possible that I'll achieve a breakthrough so soon?" "Don't worry. I'm just going to cultivate an eye secret technique." "Are you being serious with me?" The royal lord was doubtful. "What's the point of me lying to you in this situation? Moreover, you will certainly be able to tell what I'm doing at this range," Yang Kai explained. "What do you think? It has come to a point where we have to cooperate if we want to get out of this trap. Why don't we stop making things difficult for each other?" After giving it some thought, the royal lord nodded. "Good." Saying so, he stopped in his tracks. Yang Kai let out a breath and stopped moving as well. There was nothing he could do if the other party insisted on chasing after him relentlessly. Even though he was still able to cultivate the eye secret technique while moving around, it was far less efficient than if he could sit and focus. Without anyone interrupting him, he could concentrate on doing it. Not long after the royal lord started chasing after him back then, Yang Kai activated the demon eye of annihilation in an attempt to see through the dense fog celestial phenomenon's mysteries. After 10 years of hard work, he had indeed discovered some patterns in it. What made him feel even more pleasantly surprised was that the demon eye of annihilation showed signs of a breakthrough. In other words, He was about to achieve a breakthrough with this mastery of this eye secret technique. The myriad demon's old ancestor, who was young Kai's mentor, had told him about it when they were still in the myriad demon's pass back then. At that time, young Kai had coughed up a lot of military merits to get a chance to ask the myriad demon's old ancestor to teach him the profundities of the two eye secret techniques. Over the years, young Kai had been working hard to improve these eye secret techniques, but he had never had the time to really focus on cultivating them. All the same, the chance presented itself after he barged into this dense fog celestial phenomenon. Although the royal lord had stopped pursuing him, young Kai naturally didn't fully trust him and kept his guard up while activating his power to run a special cultivation route and improve his eye secret technique. It was a process that required lots of hard work and attention to detail. Regardless of how powerful a cultivator was or how robust their body was, they still possessed some innate weaknesses, and a person's eyes were especially fragile. The reason it was difficult to cultivate the eye secret techniques of myriad demons, heaven wasn't that they were particularly abstruse. On the contrary, it was actually quite easy to start cultivating these two eye secret techniques. One just had to activate their power and run a special cultivation route around their eyes as they continuously improved their vision. As time passed, they would succeed at mastering these eye secret techniques. What was difficult was the process. The eyes were a weakness to every cultivator. By using one's own power to train the eyes, they would either yield no results or risk damaging these sensitive organs. If one wasn't careful enough, their eyes might explode, turning them blind. It was said that in the early days, there were a lot of blind people in myriad demons heaven because they had cultivated these two eye secret techniques. Then, the high-ranking officials of myriad demons heaven realized they couldn't let this keep happening, otherwise, all their disciples would become blind. Therefore, they stopped letting ordinary disciples learn these eye secret techniques. Only the brightest disciples had a chance to cultivate these eye secret techniques, and they would have to pass a number of tests before they began. Unlike the disciples of myriad demons heaven, young Kai wasn't worried about his eyes exploding. That was because he had inherited his eye secret techniques from great demon god, Mo Sheng. He had gotten the hang of the eye secret techniques long ago, but his current problem was that his eyesight wasn't acute enough. With such a natural advantage, he was far ahead of young disciples from myriad demons heaven when it came to cultivating these eye secret techniques. It could be said that he didn't have to go through the dangerous initial stage of cultivation at all. Mo Sheng had built the foundation for him, so he just had to keep on improving and master the eye secret techniques. 10 years of exploring the dense fog celestial phenomenon was also a kind of training for young Kai, hence, it wasn't surprising that he was about to achieve a breakthrough with his demon eye of annihilation. As the royal lord watched closely, young Kai sat down with his legs crossed and closed his eyes. His aura became completely still as though he was dead. The royal lord's expression changed as he had the urge to flare up and take young Kai's life. However, as he considered the distance between them and the strangeness of this fog, he knew that even if he made a move now, he wouldn't be able to achieve his goal. Moreover, this seventh-order human was certainly still wary of him. If he made a move, the other party wouldn't just sit idly by, therefore, he could only suppress this urge. On top of all that, if young Kai could really find a way out, the royal lord could follow him and leave this place as well. He had the confidence to deal with whatever happened afterwards, which was why he agreed to young Kai's request. As time passed, following young Kai's activation of power, he felt that his left eye was getting hotter until it became unbearably scorching, as though something was stuck in his eye. Instead of feeling shocked though, he was thrilled. He knew that it was the sign of achieving a breakthrough that the myriad demon's old ancestor had told him about before, therefore, he exerted more force to sharpen his vision. Half a month later, the feeling of blockage intensified. When it reached a peak, young Kai suddenly opened his eyes. His right eye looked perfectly normal, but his left eye was blood red. His aura undulated and turned into several streams as they crashed into his left eye. With a solemn expression, the royal lord stared fixedly at him. Although he was able to learn a lot about the humans through the black ink nest in the primordial heavens source grand restriction, it wasn't first-hand information after all. It wasn't until he witnessed young Kai cultivating a secret technique that he realized there was a reason why the Black Ink clan hadn't managed to defeat the humans after all these years of war. While the royal lord was lost in his thoughts, young Kai started growling like an injured beast. At the same time, not only did young Kai feel that his left eye was scorchingly hot, he also felt as though countless needles had jabbed into his eye. A moment later, there seemed to be innumerable ants that crawled through his body, making him feel limp and numb. Young Kai secretly cursed, for the myriad demon's old ancestor had never told him that he would be bothered by all sorts of odd sensations when achieving a breakthrough with this eye secret technique. The average open heaven realm master could easily bear such disturbance, however, it had come to a critical point where he was trying to achieve a breakthrough and the slightest anomaly could make him suffer cultivation dissonance. When that happened, he wouldn't only risk failing to achieve the breakthrough, but his eye might also explode. He withstood the discomfort in his eye and continued to activate his power to sharpen his eyesight. A moment later, a cloud of blood mist billowed from his left eye. When the royal lord saw that, he couldn't help arching his brow. He wasn't even sure if he should feel pleased or worried. He was pleased because there seemed to be something wrong with young Kai's cultivation, otherwise, a cloud of blood mist wouldn't have appeared from his eye. What he was worried about was that if young Kai failed in his attempt, could they still find a way out? Although the royal lord was tremendously more powerful than young Kai, that didn't mean he would be capable of finding a way to get out of this eerie celestial phenomenon. While he was waffling back and forth in his head, young Kai suddenly turned to look at him. What came into the royal lord's sight startled him. He initially thought that young Kai's left eye must have exploded, but at this moment, his eye was still intact. His left eye was no longer filled with redness. Instead, it was radiating a glow. Initially, young Kai's eye was golden after he activated the demon eye of annihilation, but it had turned into something that looked like a cross now. Marshall Peak, Chapter 5422, Giant Space Beasts. The sheep-headed royal lord could clearly see his own figure in the reflection of young Kai's eye. At that instant, he was overwhelmed with a sense of discomfort. Astounded, he realized that this was no ordinary eye secret technique. What he saw in young Kai's eye was definitely more than just a reflection. Just then, a glint flashed across young Kai's pupil as he grinned. "It seems that you're badly injured. It must have been difficult for you." The royal lord's expression turned livid. When a glint flashed across young Kai's eye earlier, he had a feeling that his secrets were being pried into. He secretly cursed at this human while simultaneously thinking that this eye secret technique was indeed extraordinary. On the other hand, young Kai ignored the royal lord and scanned his surroundings. A moment later, he straightened up and flapped his arms before moving in a particular direction. The royal lord hurriedly followed him. He had agreed to young Kai's request to allow him to cultivate his eye secret technique in the hope that he could get out of this fog. As for whether young Kai would pull a trick during this period of time, that was all but certain. Regardless, the royal lord was confident that he could follow young Kai and get out of this trap. Therefore, he paid close attention to every move that young Kai made, and he followed him closely wherever the latter went. He practically imitated young Kai in every way, as though he was a delayed shadow. As young Kai's demon eye of annihilation had improved, he was able to see through this strange fog more clearly now. However, he wasn't confident that he would be able to get out just yet. No one in the world could truly comprehend all the secrets behind such a celestial phenomenon. Another year passed as young Kai silently looked for a way out. The royal lord had been patient as he kept a fixed distance from him when, suddenly, young Kai's figure disappeared from the royal lord's sight, as though everything he had seen until now was nothing more than an illusion. The royal lord was slightly shocked, but he soon pulled himself together and imitated young Kai's movements while moving in the same direction. In the meantime, young Kai felt relieved as the sense of danger that had surrounded him for over 10 years disappeared all of a sudden. There was no longer any fog in front of him. "I've finally left." Young Kai was elated. After hesitating between ambushing the royal lord and fleeing this place for a moment, he chose the latter. Even though he could certainly catch the royal lord off guard, given his strength, it was impossible for him to kill his foe with a single move. If he couldn't kill the royal lord in one move, he would be tangled up with him again. By then, He wouldn't be able to get rid of him. It would still take some time before the royal lord could get out of the fog, and while the average cultivator couldn't move across a large distance in such a short time, as a master of the Tao of space, Yang Kai stood a great chance to escape the other party's detection range. After making up his mind, he hesitated no more. As he manipulated space principles, Yang Kai disappeared from the spot. 3 breaths of time later, the royal lord also left the dense fog celestial phenomenon. As he looked around, he realized Yang Kai was nowhere to be found. Having witnessed Yang Kai's methods, he knew that this human must have activated his teleportation technique and left. At that instant, his expression darkened. It could be said that he had failed miserably in his mission. Not only did it take him such a long time, but he also achieved nothing in the end. Furthermore, he was terribly injured, and his strength had plunged. Now that Yang Kai had left using instantaneous movement, it would be hard for the royal lord to find him again. With that said, he wasn't willing to just give up. After examining the traces of space principles, he looked in a particular direction and charged forward. Soon, he detected some energy fluctuations in front of him, and as he examined them, he became elated. That was because the energy fluctuations came from the 7th-order human. He initially thought that he had lost him, so he was surprised at the turn of events. Although he had no idea what happened to the 7th-order brat, he still had a chance as the other party wasn't able to flee. At this moment, Yang Kai was so vexed that he was about to spit blood. He felt that he had never been unluckier in his life. Not long after he escaped one trap, he fell into another. Even though instantaneous movement was a secret technique that could help save his life, there was a certain degree of unpredictability with it. It would be fine if he was in a familiar environment as he could accurately arrive at a place of his choice. However, if he wasn't familiar with the environment, he would have to rely on luck for where he would land as there could be danger waiting for him. He had used instantaneous movement many times in the past, but he had never come across any serious threats while using it. Nevertheless, he suffered a setback this time. After leaving the dense fog celestial phenomenon earlier, he activated instantaneous movement and fled, but it never crossed his mind that he would actually land inside a spider's nest. There were certain creatures that lived in the void, collectively known as space beasts. When Yang Kai left the star boundary back then, he ran into a myriad facets insect. He and Zhongruo Shi were swallowed by that space beast and became separated. Yang Kai was then brought to Seven Wonders Land while it took Zhongruo Shi some effort to arrive at Exquisite Paradise. There were always some human masters who guarded the void docks of star cities and sects, first to inspect the people entering and leaving to ensure order was maintained, second to fend off the space beasts that loved harassing densely populated areas. It took quite a number of open heaven realm masters to guard the void docks of every star city to prevent accidents from happening. Throughout his adventures around the 3,000 worlds over the years, Yang Kai had come across many space beasts. When he was weak, he would stay as far away from space beasts as possible, and when he became strong enough, he just disregarded them. Upon arriving at the Black Ink battlefield, he never discovered any space beasts. After all, the war between the two races had been ongoing for years, and the space beasts that were sensitive to danger usually stayed far away. Yang Kai had not seen any space beasts during the crusade, so he thought that such creatures simply didn't exist on the Black Ink battlefield. Therefore, it surprised him when he came across them at this point. This was the nest of a group of voidant spiders which was located in a dead universe world. The entire universe world was covered in spider webs. They seemed to be a family with 2 adults and 5 children. The adult spiders were just as large as Yang Kai's 70,000 meters ancient dragon form. On the other hand, the 5 smaller voidant spiders were just 10,000 meters long. They looked like a cross between spiders and ants with hideous appearances and had probably been living here for eons. Yang Kai felt that the auras exuding from the 2 adult voidant spiders suggested that they were as formidable as the most powerful 8th-order open heaven realm masters. It even seemed like they had traces of divine spirit bloodlines. The 5 smaller spiders were equivalent to 7th-order masters. Usually, such levels of strength wouldn't have bothered Yang Kai. The crux of the problem was that the void around the spider's nest was filled with webs of different sizes. Right after he activated instantaneous movement from outside the dense fog celestial phenomenon, young Kai crashed into one of these spider webs. Worse, the webs had a heaven-sealing earth-locking property. As soon as he came into contact with the web, he became trapped and was unable to break free from it. He couldn't figure out how this family of voidant spiders survived in such an environment. With that said, space beasts usually had some unusual powers, therefore, hostile environments wouldn't bother them. Thrilled to feel young Kai's aura, the 5 smaller spiders, which had been hiding in the nest, came over and surrounded him. The 2 adult spiders never moved, but their eyes reflected young Kai's figure. Noticing the larger spider's stares, young Kai felt a crawling sensation on his scalp. He had already summoned his azure dragon spear and was now battling against the 5 smaller spiders. Despite the fact that they were only equivalent to 7th Order Masters, young Kai wouldn't dare to kill them lest the 2 parents become enraged. Furthermore, due to the spiderweb's restriction, young Kai was in a perilous situation while he was besieged by the small ant spiders. Some spider silk coiled around his spear, making it hard for him to wield his weapon. Just then, he felt the Royal Lord's aura. Turning his head, he indeed saw the Royal Lord standing outside the webs and staring curiously at him. "Help!" young Kai exclaimed as though the other party was his savior. The Royal Lord snorted and ignored him. He had been hunting young Kai for over 10 years now. Even though it was a shame that he couldn't personally kill him, he wouldn't mind seeing him lose his life here. Having made up his mind, he stood outside the spiderwebs and waited for young Kai's eventual death. Seeing that, young Kai realized his intention and shouted, "Don't you want to know what Kang gave me before his death?" The Royal Lord replied impassively, "Regardless of what it is, it will be useless after you die." Young Kai said through clenched teeth, "I don't think so. I'll definitely activate that thing before I die. It's the last method that Kang left behind to deal with Mo." The Royal Lord squinted his eyes, "Tell me more about it." Young Kai shook his head, "I won't tell you about it, and you won't find out unless you save me from this place. Then die. You're forcing me to do it." Young Kai roared as a golden light radiated from him. The Royal Lord was instantly astounded, for the golden light indeed contained the aura that Kang had left behind. "Even if I die, Mo will suffer as well. Mo is in a deep sleep now, so it is definitely unsuspecting of any danger. This thing might not kill Mo, but it'll certainly injure it." As young Kai spoke, the golden light shone more brightly. The golden light faintly engulfed young Kai as though it was ready to bring him out of this place. The Royal Lord's expression changed. The reason he decided to watch on the sidelines and ignore young Kai's plea was that he believed that regardless of what Kang's trump card was, it would be rendered useless following young Kai's death. However, it now seemed that if young Kai was pushed over the edge, he would activate the trump card. As for what happened after that, the results were completely unpredictable. The Royal Lord had no idea if young Kai was telling the truth, but Mo was the source of the Black Ink clan. To the Black Ink clan, it was their supreme being, their god, so there was no way the Royal Lord would allow anything to injure Mo. If Mo was wounded because of him, he would never be able to make up for his mistake. "Stop!" the Royal Lord roared. "Cut the crap. If you don't save me, I'll make sure Mo suffers." Young Kai gritted his teeth and yelled. The Royal Lord's expression turned livid. He had never expected to be threatened by young Kai in such a situation. Suppressing his fury, he surged his black ink strength, which turned into a dark tide that penetrated the spider webs. He decided not to kill those voidant spiders and instead tried to corrupt them with black ink strength. Given the fact that he was a royal lord, it should be easy for him to corrupt these voidant spiders. As long as he succeeded, they would become loyal to him, and he would be able to easily capture young Kai. Soon, the dark tide coursed through the void that was filled with spider webs before engulfing the 5 smaller spiders. Seeing that, young Kai secretly cursed at the royal lord for being so cunning. Marshall Peak, Chapter 5423, Void and Spiders. Although young Kai hoped that the sheep-headed royal lord could get him out of this place, the other party was naturally not so kind-hearted. As long as the royal lord could corrupt these 5 small ant spiders with black ink strength, he could take control of young Kai. Seeing that the dark tide was about to swallow the little ant spiders, Yang Kai activated his divine sense and sent a transmission to the two larger spiders: "If you keep watching and do nothing, your children will be doomed." He's a black ink clansman. Yang Kai had no idea if these two large ant spiders had any spirituality, nor could he be certain whether they understood what he said. However, if he wanted to survive today, he had to provoke them into action. The best outcome would be the large ant spiders getting into a fight with the royal lord. That way, he could watch the show from the sidelines. Nevertheless, Yang Kai was bound to be disappointed, for the large ant spiders were unperturbed by his words. Even though they still remained in their nest, they just stared vigilantly at the royal lord without acting. Unlike Yang Kai, this royal lord gave off a great sense of danger, which was why they had to keep their guard up yet didn't dare make any rash moves. At this point, the dark tide had engulfed the 5 small ant spiders, which were unable to resist as the black ink strength instantly corrupted them. In just a moment, they were stained with black ink strength and their originally bright eyes turned dark. Finally realizing something was wrong, the two large ant spiders started squirming anxiously and hissed. The little ant spiders turned violent all of a sudden. They spat out threads of silk that turned into spider webs that further restrained Yang Kai. The spider webs were not only robust, but also able to trap people. Yang Kai had suffered a setback because of them already, so he was wary of such things. Understanding the situation was deteriorating, he directly used Golden Crow casts the sun. A great sun leaped from behind him and a golden crow cawed as a scorching heat spread out. Many spider webs melted, but they came in such large quantities that even Golden Crow casts the sun was unable to ward them all off. Within moments, the great sun disappeared, and the spider webs covered Yang Kai, wrapping him up tight. The little ant spiders surrounded him and wielded their legs. However, as soon as they got close, Yang Kai's figure faded and disappeared. It was nothing more than an illusion. Just as the little ant spiders were baffled, Yang Kai appeared in front of one of them with his spear in hand. With a solemn expression, he surged his world force as his azure dragon spear transformed into innumerable spear shadows and engulfed the ant spider. In an instant, the little ant spider was rooted to the spot. All its eyes exploded and green liquid burst out of its wounds. Following that, even its head exploded. At that moment earlier, Yang Kai had struck the ant spider countless times. Sparks were formed as his azure dragon spear came into contact with its armored head. Even though these little ant spiders had strange abilities and formidable strength, they were still just equivalent to 7th Order Open Heaven Realm Masters. Therefore, it wasn't hard for Yang Kai to kill them. The reason he didn't make a move earlier was that the spider webs in the void had greatly restricted his movements. Moreover, he was wary of the two large ant spiders, so he didn't dare to kill the little ones. Now, he had no choice, for the royal lord had corrupted the little ant spiders. If Yang Kai didn't kill them, he would be trapped here forever. As for what would happen after he killed them, that was the last of his concerns. The moment the little ant spider was killed, the other 4 were astounded as they hurriedly retreated. The two large ant spiders, which had been hiding in the nest, were startled for a moment before they became enraged. They started hissing angrily as they climbed through the webs and came at Yang Kai. Before they even arrived, one pointed leg scythed at Yang Kai. Surprisingly, Yang Kai saw the shadow of a space secret technique in that attack. The pointed leg broke through the blockage of space and stabbed at him. A flabbergasted Yang Kai knew that he had underestimated these large ant spiders, so he promptly raised his spear to block the attack. The next instant, a violent force came right at his face and his azure dragon spear was almost knocked away from him. Upon impact, he was sent flying away while he sprayed out a mouthful of blood. Shortly after that, he fell into a spider web with his limbs spread wide. Regardless of how hard he tried, he was unable to break free from the restraint. The other large ant spider that hadn't made a move charged forward. Its figure was elusive, and with the blessing of space principles, it kept disappearing and reappearing as it approached Yang Kai. Seeing that, Yang Kai felt his heart thumping in his chest, knowing that the void ant spiders had cultivated the Tao of space. Perhaps it was their bloodline talent. What are you waiting for? Faced with the danger, Yang Kai growled as a golden light radiated from him and Kang's aura spread out again. The royal lord's face fell when he saw that. He initially wanted to use the ant spiders to kill young Kai, but he had no choice now but to order the 4 little ant spiders to protect him. While reaching for young Kai, the large ant spider was evidently startled. It had no idea why its children were going against it. Then, it started hissing as though it was communicating with the smaller ant spiders, but having been corrupted by black ink strength, the little ant spiders ignored it and started attacking. At that instant, the large ant spider was flustered. The large ant spider that had attacked young Kai earlier probably had some degree of sentience, and realizing something, it spat out a web to cover the royal lord in the distance. The royal lord snorted and evaded the spider web. However, the spider web expanded suddenly and covered a vast area of the void. The surprised royal lord was instantly trapped, and before he could destroy the spider web, the large ant spider dashed towards him. Still stuck to the spider web, young Kai was ecstatic when he saw that, as he complained to himself, they should have just fought from the start. With no one harassing him anymore, he could now find a chance to flee. Without hesitation, young Kai surged his golden crow's true fire. The silk threads were robust and sticky, but based on his previous experience of using golden crow casts the sun, young Kai was confident that he could destroy these spider webs with his flames. This time, he summoned his golden crow's true fire as his world force burned madly. Soon, he turned into a fireball, and as expected, the spider webs around him began melting. When the royal lord, who was fighting against the large ant spider, saw this, he widened his eyes in disbelief and raised his hand to swat the ant spider away. Although the large ant spider had a power that was equivalent to the peak of the 8th order, and the royal lord was heavily injured, there was still a huge gap between their strengths. If the royal lord wanted to kill the large ant spider, it would only take him 10 breaths to do so. On the other hand, young Kai, who had just broken free from the spiderweb, felt his chest tightening as he realized he had underestimated the royal lord. He was secretly glad that he didn't decide to ambush him after leaving the dense fog celestial phenomenon a while back. Back then, by using the demon eye of annihilation, young Kai could see that the royal lord was horribly injured and even had the urge to fight it out with him. Now, it was apparent that if he had done so, he would have ended up in a horrible state. Although the royal lord had been weakened, he was still significantly more powerful than young Kai. Young Kai couldn't help but admire himself for being able to escape from this royal lord for such a long time. After driving the large ant spider off, the royal lord immediately tried to pin down young Kai. However, the large ant spider came at him again. Infuriated, the royal lord threw out his fist with greater strength than the previous time, and a dent was instantly formed on the ant spider's head. It wasn't clear whether it was dead or alive at this point. Then, the royal lord bolted towards young Kai. Currently, young Kai's figure was burning with fire as he broke through layers of spider webs. 3 breaths of time later, there were no more restraints. Then, he activated purifying light and blocked the royal lord's aura. The next instant, space principles undulated as he disappeared from the spot. The moment young Kai disappeared, the royal lord's aura exploded. After such a long time, the royal lord had learned how to deal with young Kai's instantaneous movement. If he did nothing, this 7th order human could move across a vast distance with ease, and although he was unable to stop young Kai from using instantaneous movement altogether, he could effectively interrupt the latter by bombarding the void with his aura. As expected, barely 1,000,000 kilometers away, young Kai fell from the void while spitting blood. Without turning his head, he continued charging forward. "You think you can escape?" Incensed, the royal lord raced after him. After they were gone, the large ant spider with a dent in its head shook its body and turned to look at its partner and 4 children that were still locked in an intense battle. Even though the little ant spiders were no match for the large ant spider, the latter didn't have the heart to kill them. Young Kai and the royal lord seemed to have returned to the time before they had barged into the dense fog celestial phenomenon. They traversed the expansive void as one ran away from the other. After crossing many billions of kilometers, they realized that there were no more worn-out divine abilities and restrictions left in the void. It seemed that they were no longer in the late ancient era battlefield. Even more wonderful celestial phenomena came into young Kai's sight, and they came in a significantly larger quantity than what could be seen on the late ancient era battlefield. Young Kai couldn't help but think that perhaps in the late ancient era, That particular battlefield was also filled with celestial phenomena. However, many of them must have been destroyed during the epic conflict. Every celestial phenomenon exuded a very dangerous aura, and having suffered a setback in the dense fog celestial phenomenon, Yang Kai was wary of them now and would not dare to dive into any of them again. Of course, inside the dense fog celestial phenomenon, Yang Kai wasn't the only one who had been made miserable. Even the Royal Lord had suffered a huge setback in that place, as all his current wounds were formed while he was in the dense fog celestial phenomenon. Right now, Yang Kai didn't even have time to stop and activate the universe transference law. If he could activate the universe transference law, he could make use of it to locate a purifying black ink battleship and rendezvous with his fellow humans, but that was currently impossible. Moreover, he had already lost his way, so he wasn't sure how far away the purifying black ink battleships were from him. Even if he used the universe transference law, he probably couldn't connect to the universe array onboard one of the purifying black ink battleships. After years of fleeing, he was still in an unfavorable position. Marshall Peak, Chapter 5424, Great Sea. Every time Yang Kai used instantaneous movement, he would be struck by the sheep-headed Royal Lord. He could certainly bear the consequences of getting struck 1 or 2 times, but he had forgotten how many times he had been lambasted now. After getting wounded repeatedly over the months, Yang Kai found it hard to heal his wounds despite having a dragon vein. On the other hand, the Royal Lord remained the same as his injuries didn't seem to exacerbate. Yang Kai had to activate instantaneous movement more frequently, which meant that it was getting harder for him to shake off the Royal Lord. After some quick calculations, he realized that if nothing was done, he would be caught after less than half a year. If his wounds were exacerbated, things would only get worse. That was why Yang Kai realized he had to make use of another celestial phenomenon. Regardless of how strange those celestial phenomena were, he would be doomed if he didn't do something. By making use of a celestial phenomenon, there was a chance he could survive. Upon making up his mind, Yang Kai continued to escape while scanning his surroundings. 2 months later, a vast area of blue that covered the void came into view. Yang Kai fell into something of a daze at this sight. Although he had seen quite a number of celestial phenomena so far, the one before his eyes was definitely the largest and most staggering. With it still being so far away, Yang Kai had no idea what this celestial phenomenon was, so he could only quicken his pace. The Royal Lord behind him saw the celestial phenomenon as well and realized Yang Kai's intention, so he also hastened himself. As he pushed his black ink strength, his speed increased. After what happened inside the dense fog celestial phenomenon, he couldn't risk letting Yang Kai enter another one. Yang Kai's expression changed when he realized the Royal Lord's aura was getting closer to him. Without hesitation, he manipulated space principles and left using instantaneous movement. The next instant, he fell from the void and sprayed out a mouthful of blood. Even so, he happened to find himself right in front of the celestial phenomenon. When Yang Kai made out what the celestial phenomenon was, he was astounded. From afar, he could see that the celestial phenomenon was vividly blue, but he had no idea what it was. It wasn't until he was right in front of it that he realized it was a great sea celestial phenomenon. It was a great sea that occupied a massive region of the void. Before this, if anyone told him that there was a great sea floating in the void, he wouldn't have believed them. But at this moment, there was indeed a vast ocean before his eyes. He couldn't help but think that there were too many unknown secrets in the universe. However, the great sea seemed to be dead. The water was so still there wasn't even a ripple. At the same time, Yang Kai failed to detect any danger coming from it. However, he had learned from his experience with the dense fog celestial phenomenon that he shouldn't judge a book by its cover. Only by entering this great sea would he find out if there was any danger inside. Standing in front of the great sea, Yang Kai turned around and saw the Royal Lord charging towards him with an anxious expression on his face. His inaction seemed to have made the Royal Lord misunderstand something, though, as he shouted, "Given your current state, you'll undoubtedly die if you go in. Why not just surrender without a fight?" Yang Kai grinned at the Royal Lord before cocking his head to spit out some blood. After cursing the Royal Lord, he turned around and leaped into the sea boldly and without hesitation, with the thought that if he was going to die, It would be on his terms, not at the hands of the enemy. The royal lord's expression changed, stunned by Yang Kai's resoluteness. A moment later, he reached the great sea and scanned it. Next, he pushed his black ink strength to engulf himself and plunged into the celestial phenomenon. Soon, the royal lord leapt out of the great sea with a gloomy expression. The great sea appeared perfectly tranquil from outside, but the moment he entered he realized it was extremely turbulent inside. The currents were complex and intertwined and moved with astonishing force inside the great sea. The royal lord was shocked to find that the undercurrents were so violent that he was unable to withstand them despite his strength. 3 breaths of time after he entered it, his black ink strength protection was already heavily worn down. Fortunately, the great sea celestial phenomenon was unlike the previous one. When he barged into the dense fog celestial phenomenon back then, he was unable to leave no matter how he tried. However, he was able to break free from the undercurrents here with brute force. The royal lord didn't think the 7th-order human named Yang Kai could survive in such an environment. Besides believing that Yang Kai was doomed to die, he also understood that the currents in the Great Sea were constantly shifting, so finding him would be all but impossible. As he hovered in the void, a myriad of expressions came over the royal lord's face. After debating on it for a moment, he turned around and left. Soon, he moved a dead universe world to the periphery of the Great Sea. There were countless dead universe worlds like this one in the void. As he pursued Yang Kai all this time, he had come across many of them, therefore, it wasn't hard to find one. The universe world was fairly large, but compared with the Great Sea, it was like an ant standing in front of an elephant. The royal lord stared fixedly at the Great Sea for a moment before spitting some extremely pure and dense black ink strength from his mouth. The black ink strength didn't dissipate like normal however and soon condensed into a flower bud. It was a black ink nest. Royal lords like him who came out of the primordial heavens source grand restriction each carried their own black ink nests with them. That was because Mo hoped that they would defeat the humans and occupy the 3,000 worlds, and in turn, return to extricate it from its prison. Black ink nests were the foundation of the Black Ink clan, so the royal lords would naturally carry them wherever they went. The royal lord held the black ink nest in his hands. He looked at it with such devotion that it was as though it was the most sacred treasure to him. Soon, he planted the black ink nest and infused his black ink strength into it. The black ink nest expanded rapidly and bloomed. In just half a month, many black ink clansmen stepped out of the black ink nest. After saluting the royal lord, they dispersed. Gazing at the great sea, the royal lord snorted. Although he believed that Yang Kai was doomed, he couldn't afford to take any chances. During this period of time, he had witnessed this 7th-order human using all sorts of strange methods, so he knew it would be difficult to kill him. Perhaps this brat named Yang Kai could break free from the Great Sea. As such, he had to stay. However, since he was on his own, the royal lord couldn't monitor the entire periphery of the Great Sea. Having said that, he had his black ink nest to depend on. Given enough time and resources, he could simply spawn enough servants to surround the entire Great Sea. If Yang Kai managed to escape, he would immediately find out about it. Moreover, the royal lord was badly injured, so he could take this opportunity to recuperate. It was like killing 2 birds with 1 stone, so he chose to stay here. As time passed, the black ink nest became larger and larger and even more black ink clansmen began appearing in the dead universe world. These black ink clansmen would then spread out through the void to mine resources, which would then be deposited into the black ink nest to produce even more black ink clansmen. Inside the Great Sea, Yang Kai felt dizzy. He was horribly wounded, and there wasn't a single part of his body that wasn't bloodstained and lacerated. He had transformed into his 70,000 meters ancient dragon form, but still found it hard to resist the violent currents in the Great Sea. All his dragon scales were gone by this point, and his skin was covered in black bruises. Dragon blood streamed out of his wounds constantly. The undercurrents were not the only thing he had to deal with. Even though it was difficult, he could still persevere with his ancient dragon form against those turbulent flows. What made him truly helpless was that the undercurrents contained many different sorts of martial domains. The five-element Tao essence swirled and transformed in the undercurrents, while some flows even contained potent sword Tao essence that cut through the skin of Yang Kai's dragon form. Every undercurrent was like a powerful master surging their might to attack foreign enemies. Yang Kai was swept from one undercurrent to the next, enduring so much hardship that he almost passed out. Before he barged into the Great Sea, he understood that he would have to face unimaginable danger inside, but the strangeness of this place still astounded him. The strengths of the undercurrents varied greatly. When he came across weaker flows, he could seize the chance to catch his breath. In times like these, he would swallow some spirit pills to sustain his energy. Initially, Yang Kai didn't have a way to deal with these undercurrents as he just let them push him around in this great sea. However, as time passed, he eventually began to adapt and ride these undercurrents to minimize the damage he took. Despite that, he still couldn't completely avoid the impact these undercurrents had on him. Having said that, he knew that he was just stalling for time. Sooner or later, he would be killed by the undercurrents in the Great Sea. He wanted to find a way out, but the undercurrents were turbulent without any regular patterns, so how was he supposed to achieve such a goal? His injuries had gotten worse, and the world force in his small universe was running out. Even though low-rank world fruits could quickly replenish his world force, Yang Kai had already used them all up when escaping from the Royal Lord. Now, he could only consume open heaven pills to supplement his energy. Once the power in his small universe dried up completely, the consequences would be dreadful. Therefore, he had to find a way out before then, or he would be doomed. Yang Kai had tried releasing his divine sense to scan the surroundings, but the undercurrents simply shredded his divine sense, causing him excruciating pain. The Great Sea was so vast though that there had to be somewhere that was calm. Yang Kai didn't believe this entire place was filled with such powerful undercurrents. Gritting his teeth, he released his dragon form and returned to his human one. As he let the undercurrents sweep him away, he scanned the surroundings with his divine sense irrespective of the damage this act caused. He felt a sharp pain in his head as the damage to his divine sense made his facial features contort. However, he could only soldier on. A long time passed, but just as Yang Kai was about to lose hope, he suddenly detected that there was a nearby area that was far less violent. Elated, he hurriedly activated his power and swam towards it. The process was strenuous as his flesh was peeled from his bones. As he wielded his azure dragon spear, Yang Kai stubbornly made his way across the undercurrents of the Great Sea. An hour later, he finally broke through the blockage of the present undercurrent he was occupying and barged into the next. Scanning his surroundings, Yang Kai realized that the less violent area was actually moving away from him. Flustered, he madly activated his power. He had no idea what it was like in that area, but he knew that if he missed this chance, there wouldn't be a second one. He had never been more eager to survive in his life. The pain in his body and soul was so excruciating that he had almost turned numb. The only thought that occupied his mind was that he had to break through all the obstacles before him and survive. Break. With a great roar, Yang Kai opened his mouth and spat out a round bead. Marshall Peak, Chapter 5425, Temporal River. To a Dragon Clan member, their dragon bead was like a monster core to a monster beast. It was the essence of their cultivation, and they wouldn't easily summon it, but once they did, either their enemy would die, or they would perish. Summoning a dragon bead to deal with enemies was a powerful trump card, but it almost always resulted in damage to the dragon bead. When that happened, the power of their dragon vein would be like a tree without roots or a river without a source, diminishing their strength to a great degree, if not crippling or killing them outright. In the past, Yang Kai had summoned his dragon bead to kill a badly injured territory lord. As a result, his dragon bead was damaged, and it took him many years to restore it. At that time, his dragon vein was still very weak, and he could only transform into a 30,000-meter grand dragon. Now, he was an ancient dragon, so his dragon bead was significantly mightier than in the past. This was the last move he could use. At this moment, the power in his small universe had almost dried up, and his physical body had reached its limit, yet the undercurrents in the Great Sea were as turbulent as ever. If even his dragon bead couldn't open up a path for him to survive, he would be powerless to do anything else. Fortunately, the dragon bead of an ancient dragon did not disappoint. The instant it was summoned, an immense power exploded forth. There seemed to be a dragon swimming within the dragon bead, and the intense dragon pressure which was released smashed all the turbulent undercurrents in its way. At the same time, cracks started appearing on the dragon bead. Yang Kai followed his dragon bead closely as he broke free from the undercurrent he was currently stuck in and entered the next. The dragon bead shot forward, breaking through all the obstacles as more and more cracks appeared on it. It smashed through 3 undercurrents in quick succession, and just as Yang Kai was worried that his dragon bead would be destroyed, he felt that all the pressure around him had been lifted. It was as though he had arrived at a completely different world. Since he entered the Great Sea celestial phenomenon, it had been one crisis after another. However, this space felt totally serene. It was still an undercurrent, but it was significantly less violent than the ones he had encountered before. Yang Kai even had a feeling that he was surrounded by a different kind of martial domain, but before he could look into it, his vision turned dark, and he realized he was about to pass out. He knew that he had reached his limits. His body, soul, and dragon bead had all been damaged, so he was just one step away from death. Without hesitation, Yang Kai quickly retrieved his dragon bead, which was so full of cracks that it was as though it would break apart at any moment. Following that, he blacked out and collapsed. At this moment, Yang Kai was so lethargic and dazed that he couldn't think straight, a clear sign that his soul had been badly damaged. Outside Great Evolution Pass back then, Yang Kai had experienced a similar kind of sluggishness after he used too many soul-rending thorns to attack a number of territory lords inside a black ink nest space. He had no idea how long he remained unconscious, but when Yang Kai regained his senses, he was still in a daze. Withstanding the excruciating pain, he soon recalled what had happened before he blacked out. Without hesitation, he emptied his mind and stimulated his soul-warming lotus power to repair his soul. Due to the damage to his soul, he was unable to think clearly. Now that he was in a somewhat safer situation, his most important task was to restore himself. Other matters could wait. The soul-warming lotus was a supreme treasure of the universe, so even when Yang Kai was unconscious, it continued to exude its wondrous power to heal him, but now that he was wide awake, he could make far better use of its effects. Even so, it still took Yang Kai about half a year before he managed to mostly recover from the injuries on his soul. He still hadn't fully recovered, but he was at least able to think straight now. The soul-warming lotus would take care of the rest of the damage on its own. While he was restoring his divine sense, Yang Kai did not forget to heal his physical wounds either. He consumed lots of pills and stimulated the restorative power of his dragon vein to mend his wounds. Although he still looked battered, at the very least his bones weren't visible anymore. His injuries were severe this time. In fact, he had never been more badly wounded before. Even though there were times when he fell into perilous situations in the past, he had never been so battered. He was almost pushed over the edge when he was pursued by the royal lord. It wasn't until now that he had time to inspect his surroundings. After inspecting them for a while, Yang Kai had a better idea of what was going on. He was certain that he was still within an undercurrent in the Great Sea celestial phenomenon. This undercurrent was apparently carrying him as it traversed the Great Sea, as though there would never come a day when it stopped. However, this undercurrent was different from the ones he had encountered before. Those undercurrents were all filled with different kinds of martial domains which formed into invisible attacks that killed any invaders. Nevertheless, the present undercurrent was stable, without a hint of murderous intent. All Yang Kai could feel was peace and tranquility, which was a stark contrast to the other undercurrents. He couldn't help but wonder why there wasn't any martial domain in this undercurrent. What made it different from the others? As he continued his inspection though, Yang Kai was surprised by what he found. In fact, there was a martial domain that pervaded this undercurrent as well, but it was not savage and chaotic, which was why it felt calm and tranquil. What kind of martial domain is this? Yang Kai emptied his mind and immersed himself in the martial domain. As expected, he soon felt an invisible power washing over his body. However, it didn't have any negative impact on him, which was unlike the other undercurrents that could harm him. All of a sudden, his entire figure shook. That was because he finally realized what kind of martial domain it was. It was a martial domain of time. If not for the fact that he had cultivated the Tao of time and could be considered an expert in it, Yang Kai wouldn't have noticed this. Time was invisible and intangible. A living being could barely notice the flow of time, which went by in silence and without a trace. However, Yang Kai could feel time flowing in this undercurrent. Since this was a martial domain of time, then the power that was washing over him had to be time principles. It was delicate and almost imperceptible. All of a sudden, a name he had heard of a long time ago sprang into his mind. Temporal River. The cultivation of an open heaven realm master was all about accumulation, as it took much time and effort for a cultivator to enhance the heritage of their small universe. Other than consuming an innate open heaven pill which was formed in the universe furnace, or a world fruit from the world tree, there were no shortcuts to speak of when it came to the cultivation of an open heaven realm master. Nevertheless, that didn't mean that this rule couldn't be bent. There were two shortcuts when it came to the cultivation of an open heaven realm master. Firstly, there were the small source worlds. When Yang Kai was still a newly promoted 6th Order master, he had entered a small source world in Yin-Yang Cave Heaven that had benefited him greatly. The reason he was able to break through to the 7th Order open heaven realm so quickly was largely thanks to his experience in that small source world, which saved him several hundred years of cultivation. The second shortcut was the Temporal River. When Shu Linggong led Yang Kai to the small source world back then, he told him about this miraculous treasure. Shu Linggong said that the flow of time inside a temporal river was different from the outside world. Perhaps 10 years or even 100 years would pass in a temporal river while only a single year went by in the outside world. In comparison, small source worlds were true shortcuts, while temporal rivers were more akin to the situation inside Yang Kai's small universe. While one was inside a temporal river, the flow of time was indeed real, but it was faster than in the outside world. Yang Kai had experienced a small source world before, and it was indeed incredible. All the cave heavens and paradises regarded them as core treasures, and only the best disciples were allowed to enter them. Moreover, every time a small source world was used, it would take many years before it would be activated again as part of its source strength would be absorbed. Although Yang Kai had heard about temporal rivers from Shu Linggong before, he had never seen one. There were no known temporal rivers in the 3000 worlds, nor were there any on the Black Ink battlefield, so Yang Kai had always thought that they were just an ancient legend. Shu Linggong must have seen such a record from the ancient books in Yin-Yang Cave Heaven. It wasn't until this moment that Yang Kai realized that temporal rivers were real. If this undercurrent he was presently in was isolated, it would basically be a river. If the undercurrents that contained different martial domains were isolated, in addition to the temporal river, there would be Sword Dao River, Saber Dao River, Yin Dao River, Yang Dao River, Alchemic Dao River, and so on. Temporal rivers must have existed in the 3000 worlds before, which was why there were records of them. Yang Kai should have realized it the instant he entered this undercurrent. However, his mind was muddled due to the damage in his soul at the time, so he failed to notice anything. How was this great sea celestial phenomenon formed? Yang Kai was dumbstruck. As he recalled it, the transformation and evolution of those martial domains in the undercurrents looked like different masters casting incredible attacks at first sight, but thinking back on it now, Yang Kai realized that the intrinsic nature of all of these rivers was ancient and untraceable. All of a sudden, something seemed to have dawned on him. This great sea celestial phenomenon, as well as the celestial phenomena he had and had not seen, might have naturally formed when the heavens and earth first split apart. Those celestial phenomena contained the purest form of powers of the universe, which was why the martial domains in this great sea all felt so ancient. Only when an Emperor Realm Master realized their own Grand Tao and condensed their Tao seal would they be capable of breaking through their shackles and ascending to the open heaven realm. There were all sorts of Grand Taos in the universe, and each of these Grand Taos had an infinite number of variations. Therefore, the Tao seal of every open heaven realm master was slightly different. Even for cultivators who cultivated the same Grand Tao, their Tao seals wouldn't be identical. The Tao of space that Yang Kai had cultivated was distinct and different from that of Li Wuyi. His mastery and understanding of the Tao of time were also different from that of the flowing time Great Emperor, and could not be the same as those of Yang Xiao and Yang Shui. The brightest cultivators who had left young Kai's small universe often inherited his aptitudes in the spear Tao, Tao of space, and Tao of time. They had a natural advantage when it came to cultivating these three grand Taos. However, none of them followed the exact same martial Tao as young Kai. If one compared the myriad grand Taos to a tree, then each grand Tao was like a branch that would grow into many different twigs and leaves. Those twigs and leaves came from the same source, but they were all slightly different. All the grand Taos intertwined with one another, and there had to be a source, which was the very foundation of the grand Taos. Although there were many different grand Taos, they all could be traced back to the same source. If this great sea celestial phenomenon was naturally formed when the heavens and earth split apart, the martial domains rich in Tao essence in the undercurrents might not be the source of those grand Taos, but they must contain part of the source's aura. In other words, these undercurrents contained the raw power of the universe, the very foundation of all grand Taos. Martial Peak, Chapter 5426, No Other Choice. Upon that realization, young Kai couldn't help grinning. His laughter was muffled initially, but as time passed, he started guffawing to the point where he cried tears of joy. Although he had gone through so much hardship and almost lost his life, he came across such an opportunity. To escape from the sheep-headed royal lord, he took the risk and dove into this great sea celestial phenomenon. It never crossed his mind that he would arrive at such a cultivation paradise. There was no doubt that the undercurrents in the Great Sea were akin to innate treasures of the universe. Their very existence was a natural wonder. At that instant, young Kai even had the urge to thank the royal lord. If not for the latter's relentless pursuit, he would never have come across this place. It had only been several hundred years since he ascended to the seventh order open heaven realm, and although time flowed several times faster in his small universe than other open heaven realm masters, and he had a world tree clone to purify his world force, both of which allowed him to cultivate multiple times faster than average, he was still a long way off from the eighth order. Young Kai estimated that it would be another 1,000 to 2,000 years before he could achieve a breakthrough. That length of time seemed too daunting to him. Initially, this reality was giving him a severe headache. He had been trying to come up with ways to increase his cultivation speed so that he could make it to the eighth order open heaven realm sooner. He even had the urge to seek out the grand ancient ruins boundary so that he could ask for a high-rank world fruit from the world tree. However, the grand ancient ruins boundary had been elusive since time immemorial. He was extremely lucky even to have a chance to enter it back then, so it seemed practically impossible for him to go there again. Furthermore, even if he managed to find the grand ancient ruins boundary, would the world tree even give him a high-rank world fruit? Just like Mo, the world tree was one of the oldest living beings in the universe. If it refused to give young Kai the world fruit, he wouldn't be able to do anything about it. Now that he was inside a temporal river though, young Kai didn't have to worry about ascending to the eighth order open heaven realm anymore. Young Kai wondered what the time flow differential in this temporal river was compared to the outside world, but by analyzing the time principles around him and considering the density of time Tao essence, he believed the flow of time here was at least 10 times faster than normal. In other words, if he spent 10 years in this place, only 1 year would pass in the outside world. He could cultivate in this place with peace of mind until the day he made it to the eighth order open heaven realm. Although as a seventh order open heaven realm master, he was no match for the sheep-headed royal lord, he was able to evade him for several years. If he managed to ascend to the eighth order open heaven realm, he had the confidence to flee from the royal lord with ease even if he was incapable of defeating him. A fervent young Kai immediately fished out all sorts of resources and started refining them, but a problem soon came to his mind. Did he have enough resources to reach the eighth order open heaven realm? Initially, he had accumulated a staggering amount of resources, more than enough to reach the eighth order open heaven realm. After all, he had plundered quite a few Black Ink clan territories over the years and acquired a massive quantity of cultivation materials. However, when Kang asked for some resources to restore himself back then, young Kai had passed the bulk of what he owned to him. Moreover, to escape from the royal lord over the years, young Kai had used up a large amount of the blue and yellow crystals he had left. As a result, he was seriously lacking in yin and yang element materials. He certainly had sufficient 5-element materials, But if he used up all his yin and yang element materials before he ascended to the 8th order open heaven realm, he would be in serious trouble. However, it was pointless for him to worry about it at this point. He would find out if he had sufficient resources as he cultivated. He then circulated his secret art and began refining a set of 7 element materials. They were absorbed by Yang Kai and turned into the heritage of his small universe. The speeds at which open heaven realm masters could refine materials varied. The fundamental reason was the sturdiness of their Dao seals they had condensed when they were still Emperor realm masters. The more robust their Dao seal was, the quicker one could refine cultivation materials. Therefore, even if 2 open heaven realm masters were in the same order, the speeds at which they could refine resources could be very different. The one with a better foundation could refine materials more quickly and grow their power more rapidly. Even a slight difference would become massive over hundreds or thousands of years. When Yang Kai condensed his Dao seal back then, he was able to withstand the impact of 7th order materials, so when it came to the speed of refining materials, only those once-in-a-generation geniuses from the cave heavens and paradises were somewhat comparable to him in the entire 3,000 worlds. Since Yang Kai was a 7th order open heaven realm master now, he could fully refine a set of 5th order materials in a few days. Then, he fished out another set of materials. The process of cultivation was dull, but the increase in power was real and exhilarating. Therefore, despite the monotony, a cultivator was more than capable of cultivating in seclusion for hundreds of years. Once a person was engrossed in the increase of their power, they would no longer feel the passage of time. Half a year later, Yang Kai's flesh wounds had mostly healed, and although his soul was still damaged, he didn't have to worry about it as he had the soul-warming lotus help. However, his dragon bead was still full of cracks. From previous experiences, Yang Kai knew that repairing a dragon bead couldn't be rushed. It required him to use the power of his dragon vein to nurture it slowly. Perhaps it would be restored to a perfect state again in several hundred years. After refining another set of materials, Yang Kai opened his eyes and sensed his surroundings. Then, he furrowed his brow because he detected some unusual changes. Over the past 6 months, besides refining materials to increase his cultivation, Yang Kai had also been making use of the ambient time principles and time Dao essence in the temporal river to comprehend the Dao of time. He had benefited greatly from this. The bloodline talent of the Dragon Clan was the Dao of Time. Back in the Dragon Pool, Yang Kai managed to grow into a 70,000-meter ancient dragon. With the increase in the power of his dragon vein, his mastery over the Dao of Time had also improved significantly, growing from the 6th level to the 7th level. It was only 1 level behind his mastery over the Dao of Space now, which had reached the 8th level. Nevertheless, that single level was still a far distance to cross. The reason the flow of time was different in a temporal river was that it was filled with ample time Dao essence. The time Dao essence and time principles continuously washed over Yang Kai's mind and body. This kind of impact was invisible and imperceptible to someone who had never cultivated the Dao of Time, so they wouldn't detect any anomaly while inside the temporal river. It wasn't until after one left this place that they realized the flow of time was different. On the other hand, Yang Kai could make use of these impacts to study the Dao of Time. He could even refine the time Dao essence directly to improve his mastery of the Dao of Time. That was what he had been doing these past 6 months. However, he now realized that the temporal river seemed to have become shorter. The lengths of the undercurrents in the Great Sea were all different, and although he had not checked it carefully, Yang Kai reckoned that the temporal river was about 9,000 meters long when he first entered it. Now, however, it was 500 meters shorter. Was it because he had barged into this place and absorbed the time Dao essence here? Yang Kai had no idea, but after giving it some thought, he stopped comprehending the Dao of Time and instead focused on just cultivating. Half a year later, Yang Kai opened his eyes and scanned his surroundings once again. The temporal river had become shorter again, though it wasn't as severe as the previous time. It was now about 20 meters smaller. The difference was minimal, but Yang Kai could easily detect it as he had been paying close attention this time. These kinds of changes made him realize something. It seemed that his presence and the absorption of time Dao essence were the main reasons for the shrinking of the temporal river. In other words, as long as he was inside the temporal river, he would consume the amazing power in this place, and the river would continue to become shorter. After all, the time Tao essence was constantly washing over him, causing the flow of time in this isolated space to be different from that of the outside world. He had only been cultivating for another half a year, but the river had become 20 meters shorter. In other words, the river would shrink about 40 meters a year if he did nothing but cultivate. As such, this temporal river would be gone for good in around 200 years at most. If he simultaneously absorbed the time Tao essence in this place and cultivated it, the river would disappear even sooner. Upon this realization, Yang Kai's expression darkened. Initially, he intended to stay in this temporal river until he ascended to the 8th order, but now it seemed that the temporal river would disappear in just about 200 years. That amount of time wasn't sufficient for him to make it to the 8th order. What should I do now? After giving it some thought, Yang Kai realized that the Great Sea was vast, and it had countless undercurrents in it. Since there was one temporal river here, there might be another. Even if this temporal river was completely consumed, he could just go looking for the next one. As long as there were 5 to 6 temporal rivers of this size in the celestial phenomenon, he would be able to ascend to the 8th order. Right now, Yang Kai's main task was to increase his strength. He wasn't sure if the Royal Lord had also dived into this place, but if he had, there might come a time when they bump into one another. Regardless, where there was a will, there was a way. It was pointless for Yang Kai to overthink things at this point. He then set his mind at ease and stopped absorbing the time Tao essence in the temporal river, instead focusing all his efforts on cultivating. Sets of materials were refined as time went by. Just like what he had estimated, about 40 meters of the temporal river would vanish for every year he spent in this place. Yang Kai slowly became wholly absorbed in cultivation and lost track of the outside world. He had never cultivated for such a prolonged period of time before. Initially, he found it difficult to adapt, but as the heritage in his small universe increased, he slowly got used to it. About 160 years later, Yang Kai was shocked awake by an anomaly while cultivating. He hurriedly opened his eyes and realized that the temporal river was only 100 meters long now. It was originally a long river, but it had significantly shortened over the years. Due to its length, it couldn't even sustain its own existence anymore, and as it was battered by the other undercurrents, it was on the brink of collapse. Yang Kai could feel that the martial domains in the other undercurrents had broken through the isolation of the temporal river. His expression changed as he stored the set of materials he hadn't fully refined and got to his feet. It was time to leave this temporal river. Despite knowing that this day would come, Yang Kai still felt lost when he finally had to set out. He had no idea if he could find another temporal river. The undercurrents in the Great Sea celestial phenomenon were turbulent, so perhaps before he could find the next temporal river, he would be killed by them. However, he had no other choice. Surging the power of his dragon vein, dragon scales started appearing on Yang Kai's skin, including his eyelids, and his entire figure radiated a golden glow. Martial Peak, Chapter 5427, 10,000 Grand Daos. The undercurrents in the Great Sea celestial phenomenon were savage, and Yang Kai didn't have the confidence to resist them without relying on the power of his dragon vein. He summoned his azure dragon spear and let out a breath as he checked to ensure he was in peak condition. Just as he was about to bolt out of the temporal river, he paused as an idea sprang to his mind. The temporal river was only 100 meters long now, and as the other undercurrents clashed with it from all directions, it would probably fall apart soon. When that happened, this temporal river would be gone for good. Although the 100-meter temporal river couldn't be considered long, it still contained a lot of time Tao essence. Thinking about this precious resource, Yang Kai couldn't help wondering if he could keep it inside his small universe. The instant he had that thought, he could no longer contain the impulse to act. Time Tao essence was hugely beneficial to him. If he could keep it inside his small universe and absorb it, it would help improve his mastery of the Tao of time. Without hesitation, he opened a portal to his small universe and released his divine sense, which engulfed the temporal river and drew it into the portal. The next instant, Yang Kai's expression changed drastically. He quickly shut the portal to his small universe and surged his world force before infusing it into his azure dragon spear. His dragon roar reverberated as the azure dragon spear transformed into a massive dragon and shattered the blockade of the undercurrent in front of it, leading Yang Kai to charge forward. Sparks flew from his dragon scales as Yang Kai groaned in pain as his dragon blood gushed out of his wounds. Although his power had increased significantly, he was still horribly injured the moment he was swept into the undercurrent. Clenching his teeth as his gaze was full of determination, Yang Kai wielded his spear and traversed the chaotic undercurrents. At the same time, he released his divine sense to scan the surroundings. He had to look for another temporal river. Only by finding one would he stand a chance to survive, otherwise, he would be tortured to death by these undercurrents. As his divine sense was shredded, Yang Kai felt excruciating pain in his soul. The dragon scales that had covered his entire body were battered and blown off in quick succession. After just an incense stick of time, Yang Kai was covered in blood. There wasn't even a part of his skin that was left intact, but he still hadn't managed to find another temporal river. 1 hour later, half his flesh had been ripped off, revealing many of his bones and making him look extremely miserable. His aura was weakening fast, like candlelight amidst the storm that might put it out at any moment. His vision was blurred, and he found it hard to sustain his divine sense. Every time he activated it, he felt a sting of pain that seemed to be tearing his head apart. Yang Kai nearly fell into despair at his situation. Previously, he was lucky as he had made use of his dragon bead at the critical moment to plunge into the 9,000-meter temporal river. Now though, it seemed his luck had run out. Moreover, even though he had been nurturing his dragon bead for nearly 200 years now, it still hadn't been restored as there were many cracks on it. If he used it again now, it would probably shatter. Just as he was about to lose hope, Yang Kai faintly sensed a calm undercurrent nearby. Another temporal river. Ecstatic, he wielded his spear and desperately swam towards that place. A dozen breaths later, he broke through 2 undercurrents and entered the one after them. He quickly sensed his surroundings, and upon making sure there was no danger, he collapsed to the ground and passed out. After 2 years dedicated to just recovering, Yang Kai began to assess his situation. Even though there was no murderous intent in this second undercurrent he stayed in, it was not a temporal river like he thought it was, for there was no time Tao essence in this place. Instead, it was a coherent grand Tao of nature river. The river was about 20,000 meters long, which was much longer than the temporal river he previously stayed in. Unfortunately, this grand Tao wasn't suitable for him. Therefore, for the past 2 years, other than recuperating, he mostly spent his time studying the 100-meter temporal river he had put inside his small universe. After the temporal river entered his small universe, he was able to digest the time Tao essence, which allowed him to gain some new understanding of the Tao of time. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. After all, if he comprehended the Tao of time in the temporal river for a year, about 40 meters of the length would be consumed. Therefore, a 100-meter temporal river couldn't bring about tremendous transformation to his comprehension. With that said, Yang Kai had now found another way to cultivate. Every undercurrent in this great sea was evolved from a grand Tao. Although he could improve himself by absorbing the grand Tao's power in the undercurrents, the speed at which he could refine it would be much faster if he could keep it inside his small universe. He had never cultivated the Tao of nature before. In fact, among the cultivators he had come into contact with before, only those from free and unfettered paradise like Ning Dao Ren had deep attainments in this grand Tao. Every move such cultivators made harmonized with the heavens and earth, and they believed that everything was born of nature and should not be governed by individuals but instead lived alongside with. Cultivators of the Tao of nature were carefree and unconcerned about worldly affairs, so although Yang Kai admired their mindset, he could never be like them. With the previous experience of taking in the 100 meters temporal river, he was curious about what would happen if he absorbed this 20,000 meters nature Tao river and assimilated it into his small universe. Would he have a solid foundation in the Tao of nature after he absorbed it? In that case, the temporal rivers wouldn't be the only thing he could benefit from in the Great Sea. As long as he could absorb and refine enough undercurrents, he could integrate 10,000 grand Taos into his martial Tao. The reason a cultivator had to focus on a single Grand Dao was that they had limited energy and time while there were unlimited Grand Daos. Only when one became a master in a particular Grand Dao would they achieve something great. If someone cultivated too many Grand Daos, other cultivators of the same generation would easily surpass them, for their comprehension wouldn't be deep. Quality was more important than quantity when it came to cultivating Grand Daos. Yang Kai had actually cultivated quite a number of Grand Daos, which included the Dao of Space, the Dao of Time, the Spear Dao, the Alchemic Dao, and the Dao of Artifact Refining. It could even be said that he knew a thing or two about Dao of Spirit Arrays, because when practicing alchemy and artifact refining, he would need to use some spirit arrays. However, there were only 3 Grand Daos that he had real accomplishments, which were the Dao of Space, the Dao of Time, and the Spear Dao. He was pretty skillful in Dao of Alchemy before he entered the 3000 Worlds, but he hadn't practiced it for a long time. That was because he had limited energy, so it was impossible that he could spend lots of time studying every Grand Dao he came across. Nevertheless, the unique characteristics of this great sea celestial phenomenon made him realize it might be possible to do just that. Yang Kai wasn't sure what would happen if he managed to comprehend and integrate 10,000 Grand Daos. With the previous experience of taking in the 100-meter temporal river, it wasn't hard for Yang Kai to absorb this nature river. Although a 20,000-meter river sounded quite long, it was nothing compared with the capacity of his small universe. Opening the portal to his small universe, Yang Kai engulfed the 20,000-meter river with his divine sense before drawing it in. In just 20 breaths of time, the entire river was gone. Before Yang Kai could inspect the changes in his small universe though, the surrounding undercurrents swarmed him. Just like what he had done 2 years ago, he wielded his azure dragon spear and summoned his dragon scales to protect himself. He pierced through the undercurrents and charged forward. According to previous experiences, he had to find a safe place within an hour, otherwise, he might not be able to persevere. Fortunately, he was now aware that there were some calm undercurrents in the Great Sea. As long as he wasn't cursed with terrible luck, he could find a safe place and recuperate before setting off again. In just 10 years, Yang Kai managed to recuperate 5 times and absorb 5 rivers of different Grand Daos, while the 6th time, he finally managed to enter a temporal river again. Upon that realization, Yang Kai was ecstatic. He hadn't come across another temporal river in the past 10 years, so he worried he would never find one. Since there was a second temporal river, there should be a third. As long as he had enough time and energy, he would find more and more. Just like what he always did after entering an undercurrent, Yang Kai first focused on recuperating. When he was fully healed, he finally had some time to inspect the temporal river. This temporal river was longer than the previous one, as it was about 13,000 meters long. He knew that he would consume about 50 meters every year just by remaining inside it to cultivate. In other words, this temporal river could last him 250 to 260 years. Elated, he hurriedly fished out a set of resources and began refining them. Although the Great Sea was full of wondrous treasures, Yang Kai had never forgotten his main goal, which was to make it to the 8th order as soon as possible. He would only be considered truly powerful with ample heritage, while everything else was just a bonus. Temporal rivers were the key to his rapid increase in strength. As he refined materials to increase his heritage, Yang Kai looked into his small universe and inspected the changes. Over the past 10 years, including the Grand Dao of Nature River, he had taken in 6 rivers of Grand Daos with different lengths. All 6 rivers were gone for good as he had fully refined them. All these rivers contained abstruse powers as they dispersed and blended into his small universe. The Dao essences of the Grand Daos that Yang Kai had never dabbled in before started appearing in his small universe. The length of a river determined the strength of the Grand Dao's power, and it indirectly influenced his achievements in that particular Grand Dao. According to his classifications of Grand Daos, some of the Grand Daos he had absorbed had now reached the 2nd level, peering through the doors. Different Grand Daos corresponded to different principles. Yang Kai couldn't be considered skillful in these Grand Daos, but they had brought about changes to not only himself but also his small universe. He had a feeling that there were some subtle differences in his small universe, but the changes were so tiny that even he, as its owner, was unable to sense them clearly. Perhaps only after he refined even more grand Tao rivers would the changes in the small universe become conspicuous. One thing he was certain of was that the changes were beneficial to his small universe. Yang Kai was elated. The Great Sea was probably the biggest treasure trove he had ever chanced upon. In fact, it was a treasure trove of the entire universe. He wondered if the sheep-headed royal lord had barged into this place and discovered it. However, Black Ink clansmen and humans cultivated differently, so even if the royal lord had come to realize this place's worth, there was nothing he could do. After realizing such benefits, Yang Kai no longer confined himself to the temporal river. From time to time, he would go out and absorb other undercurrents before coming back to continue cultivating. With that said, he bore some risks by doing so. The undercurrents were turbulent and flowed about randomly. If he didn't act swiftly enough, the temporal river would leave his detection range and he would be stuck. Therefore, he would only absorb the undercurrents within reach every time he left. Even so, he benefited greatly from these excursions. Marshall Peak, Chapter 5428, Another Breakthrough. About 250 years later, the second temporal river was only left with a length of 100 meters. Just like what Yang Kai had previously done, he transferred the remnants of the temporal river inside his small universe so that he could gradually refine it. Then, he set off on his adventure to look for the next temporal river, resting in the less violent undercurrents as he traversed this great sea celestial phenomenon. Time passed by slowly. Initially, Yang Kai kept count of how many years had passed, but gradually, he had lost himself in this kind of unusual cultivation, forgetting the passing of time as he kept looking for more temporal rivers. Every time he absorbed and refined any kind of calm grand Tao river, it would bring about some changes to his small universe, allowing him to gain some understanding of many grand Taos he had never touched before in his life. His entire small universe was filled with traces of all sorts of grand Taos now. In the past, when the humans in Void Continent cultivated, given enough aptitude, they could easily comprehend the Tao of space, the Tao of time, the Spear Tao, or other grand Taos Yang Kai had dabbled in. However, as Yang Kai refined more and more grand Tao rivers, the cultivators in his small universe now found it easier to comprehend even more kinds of grand Taos. The entire Void Continent was now a fertile place where cultivators could freely choose from a variety of grand Taos and focus on the ones that interested them. In the Void Tao Temple, many bright cultivators had reached the peak and were just one step away from ascending to the open heaven realm. However, Yang Kai was currently trapped in a place where he couldn't even guarantee his own life, so he couldn't release them. The lengths of the temporal rivers in the Great Sea Celestial phenomenon varied greatly. Some of them were thousands of meters long while some were as short as hundreds of meters, causing Yang Kai to wonder just how they were formed in the first place. Of course, longer temporal rivers allowed him to stay there and cultivate for a longer time. As he absorbed even more rivers, Yang Kai acquired some insights on many of the grand Taos. In fact, he could now be considered something of a master in quite a few of them. As more and more resources of different orders were consumed, the heritage in his small universe increased by the day. It was an extremely long and unusual cultivation session, and Yang Kai was fairly certain he was the first person in history who had ever cultivated this way for such a long time. One day, when Yang Kai was engrossed in cultivating in a temporal river, he realized there were some unusual changes occurring in his small universe. Shocked, he hurriedly investigated. As he inspected it, he felt that his small universe was going through an indescribable enhancement. The territories were expanding, and the world force in his small universe was becoming more condensed. The World Tree clone seemed to resonate with the changes in his small universe as its leaves rustled noisily and it began to madly refine his world force. Trails of light appeared in the sky, but they were not cracks but the manifestations of the Tao essences of a myriad of different grand Taos. Furthermore, some heavenly manifestations appeared in different parts of the Void Continent. The cultivators living on the Void Continent were pleasantly surprised to learn that the entire world seemed to have come alive. The grand Taos became active, which allowed cultivators to comprehend them with ease. Therefore, many hurriedly entered seclusion to take advantage of this occasion. Something suddenly dawned on Yang Kai. I'm about to break through to the Eighth Order. He had observed Shu Linggong ascending to the 8th order before, and he had learned a lot from that experience. However, his ascension seemed slightly different compared to Shu Linggong's. Every open heaven realm master who attempted to make it to the next order would fall into a perilous situation, for any accident at this moment could cause their small universe to rupture and their life to be extinguished, and it was more dangerous the higher one's order became. The 8th order was only one order below the peak, the 9th order, so it was by no means a safe endeavor. Although on the surface, Shu Linggong didn't seem to be at any risk when he achieved his breakthrough back then, the real danger lay in his small universe, which others were unable to observe. Fortunately, his ample heritage helped him get through the crisis and successfully break through. However, some open heaven realm masters would face a bottleneck at this point, and before shattering that bottleneck, they wouldn't be able to achieve a breakthrough. Back then, it took the proprietress around 200 years to break through to the 7th order. Another example was Feng Ying, who spent some 200 to 300 years trying to ascend to the 8th order. It wasn't until the grand battle against the Black Ink clan that she reappeared. Initially, Yang Kai was worried he would face a similar bottleneck, but now it seemed that he had been worried for nothing. He didn't face any kind of bottleneck, and with ample heritage in his small universe, everything just proceeded smoothly. Perhaps it had something to do with the World Tree clone, which had been in his small universe for hundreds of years now and helped to refine his world force to an incredible degree. His current world force was purer than any other 7th order masters, and the purer one's world force was, the more robust their heritage was. As a result, bottlenecks simply did not exist for Yang Kai. Yang Kai could even clearly feel that there was no danger to speak of when achieving this ascension. Although there were all kinds of different phenomena in his small universe, those were just the manifestations of the grand Taos he comprehended and the results of his cultivation, which were harmless to his small universe. Everything just took place smoothly. Yang Kai had been extremely eager to reach the 8th order as soon as possible, but when the day finally came, his heart was as tranquil as a clear lake. He wasn't as surprised or excited as he had imagined he would be. He had already expected this day to come, and he was confident he would make it to the 8th order no matter what. It was just a matter of time before he achieved it. His small universe continued to expand as it was going through an evolution, but he soon ignored the changes and continued refining materials. On the other hand, the cultivators living in Yang Kai's small universe had benefited greatly from this change. In every corner of the Void Continent, there were cultivators who gathered together as they gained greater understanding of the grand Taos they cultivated and made breakthroughs in their comprehension. In the Void Tao Temple, where the essence of the entire continent came together, many youths even managed to condense their own Tao seals at this moment. The babies born during this period of time had even more outstanding aptitudes than before. As the grand Taos all came alive, it made it easier for the cultivators to grasp them. The expansion of the world also widened the martial Tao as a whole. Gradually, all the heavenly manifestations disappeared and the visible traces of the grand Tao's manifestations vanished. The entire Void Continent returned to calmness. However, the Emperor Realm Masters could detect that this world was already very different from the past. For one, it had become vaster. Cultivators formed into groups and began surveying these new lands, confirming their initial suspicions. In the past, there was a world barrier that they couldn't move past, but now that barrier was gone and many more territories had appeared. These territories were fertile, but there weren't any living beings in them. When the sects got wind of this, they sent out their masters who led many disciples to occupy these virgin lands. Yang Kai had only placed a small number of people in his small universe back then, about 10 million or so. However, the environment in the small universe was filled with vitality, making it a paradise where cultivators could thrive. Moreover, there were no major wars or disputes, only some minor conflicts between the various sects. With the Void Tao Temple's appearance, even these conflicts also gradually vanished. With such a peaceful environment, the number of people in his small universe swelled over the millennia. As the population increased, there was a greater need for land. In the past, those from the Void Tao Temple were worried that if this went on, the entire Void Continent wouldn't be able to accommodate the increasing population within a few thousand years. Now though, that problem was solved. The landmass of Void Continent had expanded by 5 times at the very least, so even if the rate of population growth continued as it was, there was no need to worry about not having enough living space for several tens of thousands of years. Nevertheless, Yang Kai was oblivious to all of this because he was pondering on another issue. Now that he was in the 8th Order, could his power continue to increase? Back then, he was forced to ascend to the 5th Order Open Heaven realm, so theoretically, his limit was the 7th Order. However, after he consumed a mid-rank world fruit, his limit became the 8th Order. With him being in the 8th Order Open Heaven realm now, was there any future for him? There were quite a number of human cultivators whose limit was the 8th Order Open Heaven realm. Many of the 8th Order Division commanders had directly ascended to the 6th Order back then. In other words, the 8th Order was the best they could achieve in their lifetimes. Yang Kai had asked the 8th Order masters about it in the past, and he was told that after they ascended to the 8th Order, they could faintly feel a layer of restraint covering their small universes. It was this invisible restriction that confined them to the 8th Order. Regardless of how hard they cultivated, they could never break through to the 9th Order. If they forcefully tried to break that restraint, they would risk their small universes exploding, ending their lives. As such, it wasn't that the 8th Order masters didn't want to keep improving themselves, but rather that their small universes were unable to bear greater power. Now, Yang Kai was also an 8th Order Open Heaven realm master himself, and just like what the division commanders had told him, he could feel an invisible shackle on his small universe. This kind of restraint was weak and barely perceptible at the moment. However, as he strengthened his power as an 8th Order master, this kind of restraint would grow stronger to the point where he would be stopped from advancing further. As he recalled his decision of ascending to the 5th Order back then, Yang Kai did not feel regretful. At that time, under the lead of Ti Zheng, a 7th Order master from Myriad Demons Heaven, several masters stopped him from attempting to directly ascend to the 7th Order. This had nothing to do with personal grudges, as they were just trying to prevent a potential crisis. That was because there was such a catastrophe that took place in the 3,000 worlds in the past that made the cave heavens and paradises grow distrustful of those who ascended directly to the 7th Order who were not supervised by them directly. At that time, if Yang Kai hadn't ascended to the Open Heaven realm, he wouldn't have been able to enter the shadowless cave heaven and save the proprietress. After pulling himself together, he continued refining the materials to strengthen his heritage. He was still a newly promoted 8th Order master, so there was some road ahead of him yet. However, once he reached the peak of the 8th Order, that would be his limit. There might be some ways in the universe that would allow one to shatter the restraint on his small universe. At the very least, the innate Open Heaven pills that were born in the universe furnace were one way to go about it. Therefore, Yang Kai wasn't worried about it. In the future, he could go looking for the universe furnace so that he would have a chance to make it to the 9th Order. Unfortunately, those that he got from the Blood Monster Cave Heaven did not seem to have any effect on shattering the restraint on his small universe. Maybe it was the age of the pills. Or maybe, there was some other reason. Regardless, Yang Kai remained hopeful that his hope lay in the universe furnace. Time continued to go by slowly as he repeatedly set off on journeys to look for more temporal rivers. It was a rare chance, so it would be a shame if he missed it. When looking for the next temporal river or cultivating, he would seize the chance to refine even more Grand Dao rivers. Finally, there came a day when he finished refining a set of materials in a temporal river that was still 3,000 meters long, but when he was ready to fish out another set, he realized that he no longer had complete sets of materials. Regardless, Yang Kai remained hopeful that his hope lay in the universe furnace. Thanks to Dale for remembering this detail because I sure as heck did not. Wish my memory was as good. D. Marshall Peak, Chapter 5429, Dao Advancements. Initially, Yang Kai had a massive amount of resources. Before he left the 3,000 worlds for the Black Ink battlefield back then, he had made some preparations by bringing many materials of all different elements with him. Over the years, he had acquired even more resources on the Black Ink battlefield, especially when he raised chaos in the Black Ink clan's territory and robbed many of their cities. Every Black Ink clan master's territory had a large number of shops where there were innumerable resources for sale. Therefore, Yang Kai had never worried about not having enough cultivation resources. When Kang asked for some resources to restore his strength, Yang Kai gave him some without hesitation. Now, he still had a lot of materials, but those were all of the 5 elements. He no longer had any yin or yang element materials with him, including the yellow and blue crystals he had acquired from Big Brother Huang and Big Sister Lan. Among the different sorts of materials, yin and yang attribute resources were the hardest to come by. In the 3000 worlds, higher-order yin and yang element materials were considered strategic reserves even in the cave heavens and paradises. They wouldn't use them unless they absolutely had to. The situation was slightly better on the Black Ink battlefield, but all in all, yin and yang element materials were still much rarer than materials of the 5 elements. Without a complete set of materials, he couldn't continue cultivating. He regretted using too many yellow and blue crystals to block the Royal Lord's aura back then. Every time he used instantaneous movement, he had to release potent purifying light to block the Royal Lord's aura, and after years of running away, he had consumed a lot of those crystals. However, it wasn't like he had a choice. If he didn't use purifying light, he would have been killed. Even though he had a lot of open heaven pills, consuming them to cultivate was extremely slow in comparison. Moreover, he had been staying in this great sea celestial phenomenon for far too long, so he intended to leave. This cultivation session should come to an end. After making some quick calculations, Yang Kai realized he had spent 4,000 years in the temporal rivers. It only took him around 2,000 years to make it to the 8th order, while he spent the next 2,000 years cultivating, which allowed him to establish himself in the 8th order. Just like that, 4,000 years had passed. With that said, a significantly shorter amount of time had passed in the outside world. As the flow of time in every temporal river was different, and Yang Kai wasn't aware of the exact ratio compared to the outside world, so he was unable to calculate how much time had really passed by in the rest of the universe. However, he knew he had spent about 100 years outside of the temporal rivers, so taking some rough estimates, he guessed that somewhere between 400 and 500 years had passed in the outside world. How is the war between the two races? It wasn't until this moment that he thought about this matter. After such a long cultivation session, Yang Kai had almost forgotten everything about the outside world. All of a sudden, he recalled that the very reason he even barged into the Great Sea was that he was chased after by the sheep-headed Royal Lord. He hadn't seen the Royal Lord after such a long time, so he wondered if the other party had entered the Great Sea as well, or if he was even still alive. Yang Kai shook his head to push the thought to the back of his mind. To him, the most important thing now was to leave here as soon as possible. When he had ample resources, he had forgotten about the passing of time in the Great Sea. Now that he didn't have sufficient resources, it was pointless for him to keep staying here. Nevertheless, leaving this place wasn't so easy. There were countless undercurrents in the Great Sea that intertwined with each other, so it was hard for him to identify any kind of direction. Having said that, Yang Kai believed that where there was a will, there was a way. He summoned his azure dragon spear and opened up a portal to his small universe before absorbing the 3,000 meters long temporal river. Then, he charged towards the undercurrent nearest to him. Unlike when he first plunged into the Great Sea, he was no longer flustered. Over the years, he had moved across the Great Sea countless times to look for more temporal and Grand Dao rivers, so he had learned some tricks to deal with these undercurrents. Every undercurrent had evolved from a Grand Dao, which formed a martial domain. Yang Kai had never dabbled in many of those Grand Daos, so it was hard for him to react accordingly. Now, he had devoured quite a lot of Grand Dao rivers, including some of the Grand Dao of space, which helped improve his mastery over the Dao of space. By this point, it could be said that he had some basic achievements in most of the Grand Daos in the universe, though his level of mastery in them varied greatly. When he was particularly skilled in a certain Grand Dao, he would have it easier in the corresponding undercurrent. For example, Yang Kai had come across several Space Dao rivers which were full of Space Dao essence and void cracks that moved about randomly. Most people would find such an environment to be a death trap. Even Ninth Order Open Heaven Realm Masters and Royal Lords would find it hard to survive once they landed in such a river. However, Yang Kai was able to traverse the Space Dao rivers like he was strolling across a flat meadow. He just had to use his space principles to resonate with the currents in the river so he could ride along with it without being harmed. After absorbing such rivers in the past, he realized his mastery over the Tao of space had still improved, and when he came across another space Tao river, it became easier for him to deal with it. It was a virtuous cycle. Now, Yang Kai wasn't skillful in all the grand Taos, but as long as he knew a thing or two about them, he could make use of his comprehension to ward off some of the dangers in the undercurrents. If the rivers were cohesive enough, he could even refine part of them and enhance his mastery of those grand Taos. Therefore, despite knowing that it would be easy to leave, Yang Kai wasn't worried he wouldn't be able to achieve it. Given enough time, he could absorb and refine all the undercurrents in the Great Sea, and without these undercurrents, the Great Sea would simply cease to exist. This would be an enormously strenuous task as just based on his observations so far, the Great Sea was so vast that it would take him several tens of thousands of years to achieve this on his own. His experience of absorbing the undercurrents this time was different from the previous ones. Back then, Yang Kai primarily focused on looking for temporal rivers to improve his cultivation, while absorbing undercurrents was something he did when looking for the next temporal river or to break up the monotony of cultivating. However, as he focused on taking in undercurrents now, his efficiency was far higher. This caused his small universe to be filled with grand Tao rivers that he hadn't managed to refine. These rivers contained all sorts of abstrusities as they clashed in the small universe, causing some unusual phenomena. When it became too much, Yang Kai had to look for tranquil undercurrents to refine the remnants of the rivers, and only after they were fully refined would he continue with his journey. As he absorbed the grand Tao rivers, his mastery over various grand Taos improved rapidly. He had also managed to raise his spear Tao to the 7th level of mastery. His mastery of the sword Tao, which he hadn't even properly studied before, reached the 5th level, attaining mastery through comprehensive understanding. Reaching the 5th level in this grand Tao didn't do much to add to his strength, but it was enough for Yang Kai to now be considered a great master in the sword Tao. Of course, that was just the level of mastery he had achieved in a theoretical sense, and he still wasn't comparable to those who reached the same level through their own hard work and comprehension. Regardless, that was none of Yang Kai's concern, as he just wanted to make use of the advancements in the grand Taos to help him get out of this Great Sea. Furthermore, it would take one a long time and much effort to reach the 5th level of mastery in any grand Tao, but Yang Kai only had to refine a number of sword Tao rivers to achieve that. As more and more grand Tao rivers were extracted by Yang Kai, he found it easier and easier to traverse the undercurrents in the Great Sea. Having said that, there was one point that made him torn between tears and laughter. Back then, he was eager to cultivate and make it to the 8th order as soon as possible, so he always exerted himself to seek out temporal rivers, but only found one every 10 years on average. Now that he no longer needed temporal rivers to cultivate though, he chanced upon them quite frequently. After absorbing a couple dozen temporal rivers of different lengths, he suddenly felt that the flow of time in his small universe changed once again. In the past, the flow of time in his small universe was 5 times faster than the outside world, but at this moment, the ratio had increased significantly. After some quick calculations, Yang Kai realized that the flow of time in his small universe was now about 7 times faster than in the outside world. In the meantime, he had acquired some new insights on the Tao of time. His dragon vein throbbed as his dragon pressure spread out wantonly. He had achieved a breakthrough in the Tao of time when he visited the no-return pass several hundred years ago and cultivated inside the dragon pool. His mastery of the Tao of time had improved tremendously, reaching the 7th level. Now, after he absorbed a few dozen temporal rivers, he directly broke through to the 8th level, bringing it to the same level as his comprehension of the Tao of space. With that said, Yang Kai had a feeling that he wasn't far from achieving another breakthrough in his Tao of space. The prerequisite was that there were enough space Tao rivers in this Great Sea for him to absorb and refine. The realization made him feel ecstatic. As he examined the changes in his small universe, he continued to move across the undercurrents. In the periphery of the Great Sea celestial phenomenon, there were a lot of dead universe worlds where black ink nests had been planted, with one of them being especially huge as it belonged to a royal lord. There seemed to be a powerful aura hiding in this black ink nest. About 500 years ago, the sheep-headed royal lord arrived at this place and saw young Kai dive into this vast celestial phenomenon. After entering it himself to inspect the situation, the royal lord realized the great sea was full of danger, so he had no choice but to withdraw. At that time, he was badly injured, and if he insisted on chasing after young Kai, forget about finding the latter, he might even lose his life. Therefore, the sheep-headed royal lord dragged a dead universe world to this place from the void and planted his black ink nest. By doing this, he could monitor the great sea so that he could immediately capture young Kai should the latter manage to somehow survive and escape. Secondly, he had to recuperate. Now that 500 years had passed, his black ink nest wasn't the only black ink nest in the periphery of the great sea. There were about several hundred low-rank black ink nests. With that said, there were no mid-rank black ink nests yet. After all, it would consume a vast amount of energy to nurture mid-rank black ink nests, and the royal lord didn't have the intention of having his own territory lords yet. The reason he even nurtured other black ink clansmen was to help him monitor the great sea. Several hundred low-rank black ink nests were scattered around the great sea with only a short distance between them, while almost 10 million black ink clansmen had been spawned from these black ink nests. The resources in the nearby void had been fully extracted and sent to the black ink nests to help nurture more and more black ink clansmen. Now, most of these black ink clansmen were posted around the Great Sea celestial phenomenon, so if young Kai really managed to emerge, they would immediately discover him. Marshall Peak, Chapter 5430, Determined to Kill. At this moment, a feudal lord was staring at the Great Sea celestial phenomenon in front of him with a frown, sporting a doubtful expression. He had a feeling that the Great Sea had changed somehow over the years. It seemed to have become smaller, however, the change was so gradual and minute that he wasn't sure. Then, he turned to look at the royal lord's black ink nest and hesitated about whether he should report this matter. The royal lord was still recuperating, and although 500 years had passed, he still hadn't fully recovered. If this feudal lord bothered him with a trivial matter, he was worried he would be punished. Perhaps I'm imagining things. The feudal lord shook his head. He had many companions who had been keeping an eye on this great sea as well, so if the great sea had really become smaller, the others would have noticed it. Since none of them had detected it, the feudal lord believed that he must be overly worried. While he was lost in his thoughts though, there was suddenly an anomaly in the great sea. With a start, he looked towards it intently. He had been in this place for 300 years, but he had never seen any movement in the great sea, as though it was completely dead. It was odd that there were some ripples on this day. Before he could see clearly what was happening, a figure bolted out of the great sea with a spear in hand. The person seemed to be fighting against an invisible enemy as his murderous intent surged and his world force undulated. When the person appeared, he happened to meet eyes with this feudal lord. Both of them were startled, but the feudal lord soon came to his senses as he hurriedly retreated and howled to alert the others. The human that the royal lord had been waiting for had finally appeared. Although the feudal lord had never seen young Kai before, he knew this was the target the royal lord had been looking for the moment the human appeared. Following the howl, the azure dragon spear stabbed into the feudal lord's mouth. As world force burst forth, the feudal lord's head exploded. Why is there a feudal lord here? Young Kai frowned. As he looked up, his doubt intensified because there was a low-rank black ink nest on a universe fragment nearby. There were also quite a lot of black ink clansmen wandering around this universe fragment. Sweeping his eyes around, young Kai realized there were even more black ink clansmen in the void that scattered around the great sea, as though they were monitoring something. After giving it some thought, he realized what was going on. That royal lord sure is clever. I suppose he has been waiting for me to come out all this time. He must have had his own black ink nest, otherwise, he couldn't have nurtured so many black ink clansmen. As soon as I left the great sea, regardless of direction, he'd immediately find out about it. It seemed that the royal lord never entered the great sea and instead was recuperating in the periphery over the years. But how many years had young Kai been inside the great sea? Since the day he decided to leave the great sea, he had spent 200 years looking for a way out. During that period of time, he had simply been dragged around the undercurrents with no way to identify which direction he was headed. Yang Kai almost lost hope after spending 200 years looking for a way out. Fortunately, his efforts had ultimately not been in vain. Before he could ponder on this matter, a powerful aura awakened from a universe world in the distance. Following that, he saw a burly figure shooting towards him like a meteor. Before the figure even arrived, he was engulfed in the familiar royal lord's pressure. His quite quick. Yang Kai knew that the feudal lords nearby must have informed the royal lord about his appearance through the black ink nests. The feudal lords in the void also started charging towards Yang Kai in an attempt to hold him down. Yang Kai gripped his azure dragon spear and grinned. Then, he dashed towards the royal lord, and everywhere he passed, all the black ink clansmen exploded into blood mist. In the void, the royal lord was startled as he wondered, why isn't he running away? He initially thought that Yang Kai would immediately flee after leaving the Great Sea. Although this human was weak, his skill at escaping was phenomenal. Therefore, the moment he received the news from his subordinates, the royal lord dashed out of his black ink nest as he was worried that Yang Kai would escape. To his surprise though, instead of running away, the human came right at him. What gave this human brat such confidence? Had he forgotten about how battered he was while being chased by him 500 years ago? Soon, however, the royal lord realized where the human's confidence came from. As they got closer to each other, the human's aura surged and soon exceeded the limits of the 7th order before reaching the 8th order. His now in the 8th order open heaven realm, the royal lord was startled. He broke through. This damned great sea is full of deadly danger. Back then, I couldn't even stay inside for long. It would be considered lucky for this boy to have just survived, so how did he even manage to achieve a breakthrough? Did he come across some kind of astonishing opportunity inside the Great Sea? The royal lord's expression darkened, so what if he's made it to the 8th order? I'm a royal lord. In the past, he was unable to kill the human because he was horribly injured, so he couldn't fully use his strength. However, after 500 years of recuperation, his wounds had mostly healed. Although he still wasn't in peak condition, he was already much better than 500 years ago. Even if there were 5 8th order humans in front of him, he could easily deal with them, not to mention that Yang Kai was on his own. The only worry the royal lord had was about Yang Kai running. As long as the latter didn't try to escape, everything was fine. As the two figures charged towards each other, the distance between them shortened rapidly. Their powerful auras clashed, and before they even exchanged moves, the void had started warping. Suddenly, the royal lord lost sight of Yang Kai. The next instant, he was engulfed in a powerful sense of murderous intent and innumerable spear shadows. At this moment, Yang Kai wielded his spear as he showcased the skills he had acquired in the Great Sea. With his own spear Tao as the foundation, he weaved the grand Taos of luck, yin, yang, life, death, 5 elements, karma, murder, bloodlust and many others together. The power of his spear made the entire universe tremble. Even if there was a territory lord in front of him, he had the confidence to destroy him with this move. It was the strongest spear attack he had ever unleashed. Faced with this exquisite series of attacks, the royal lord responded with pure brute force. Circulating his black ink strength madly, he forcefully pushed out his fist. The next instant, Yang Kai was sent flying away while he sprayed out a mouthful of golden blood. Overwhelming power triumphed over 10,000 skills. Although Yang Kai had acquired much in the Great Sea and comprehended numerous different grand Taos, it still couldn't make up for the huge discrepancy between their raw powers. He hurriedly stabilized himself, but instead of feeling downcast, Yang Kai was thrilled. That was because he realized he was able to compete against a royal lord. Before he entered the Great Sea, he couldn't have imagined battling against a royal lord as the other party only needed to land a single punch to end his life. But now, despite still looking battered, Yang Kai had managed to trade blows with a royal lord. His breakthrough to the 8th order and the assimilation of many different grand Taos had improved his strength tremendously. Yang Kai was no longer the frail 7th order open heaven realm master he used to be. The royal lord was also flabbergasted. After striking Yang Kai with that punch, he didn't rush to pursue him and instead looked down intently at his fist. All kinds of indescribable powers swirled around his fist, and they also lingered in the void where they clashed. Those powers were inscrutable, as though they had something to do with the very foundation of energy and existence themselves, something he could not understand in the slightest. But soon, he cast those distracting thoughts away and glared at Yang Kai, murderous intent burning in his eyes. Some 500 years ago, this human escaped from him by diving into the Great Sea, but after emerging, he had become significantly more powerful. The royal lord knew he could not let such a human escape again, otherwise, many Black Ink clansmen would die at his hands in the future. Therefore, he was determined to kill Yang Kai regardless of what it took. On the other hand, Yang Kai had also decided to purge this royal lord at all costs. It wasn't that he was overly confident in himself because of the increase in his strength, but rather that he knew the secrets of this great sea and couldn't afford to let this royal lord live. There was no denying that the Great Sea was a massive treasure trove. Although he had been trapped inside for many years, Yang Kai had benefited enormously from the experience. Such a celestial phenomenon was hugely beneficial to all humans, not just him. Perhaps he could come back in the future and cultivate here again. As such, he couldn't let the secrets of this place be leaked out. If he allowed the royal lord to live, after witnessing Yang Kai's massive growth in strength, the latter would surely dive into the Great Sea and possibly discover its secrets. The Grand Daos in the undercurrents were useless to the Black Ink clan, but they were beneficial to Black Ink disciples. They just had to bring some Black Ink disciples with them to reap all the benefits of this celestial phenomenon. To prevent such a thing from happening, Yang Kai had to kill this royal lord. Moreover, it was obvious that this royal lord wouldn't let him flee either. He had been waiting in this place for hundreds of years, so now that his enemy had appeared, there was no way he would let him off. Today, either this royal lord died, or Yang Kai would perish. It just so happened that both of them were determined to destroy each other. In the next instant, Yang Kai disappeared from the spot while the royal lord surged his Black Ink strength and flapped his wings. Following that, Yang Kai abruptly appeared behind the royal lord and thrust out his spear. As though there was an eye on the royal lord's back, he swung his hand out, his palm seemingly able to suppress the heavens and the earth. Nevertheless, he realized he couldn't grasp his target. Yang Kai's afterimage dissipated in his hand while the true body reappeared on his left. Having expected this though, the royal lord directly pushed out his fist. The moment Yang Kai appeared, it was as though he chose to crash into the opponent's attack. They had exchanged over 100 moves in an instant, but they weren't going all out yet. Yang Kai's afterimages scattered around the void, as though there were dozens of him appearing at the same time. Before an afterimage dissipated, a new one had appeared. As he repeatedly thrust out his spear, Yang Kai channeled all sorts of Grand Daos into his attacks, and soon there seemed to be a web of Grand Daos that engulfed the royal lord. Unperturbed, the royal lord reacted accordingly. He knew that this human was a master of the Dao of space, so despite being the stronger one, he couldn't allow the other party to dictate the flow of this battle, otherwise, he might be the one defeated. As he was not as skillful as this human, all the royal lord could rely on was his immense power. As long as he found a chance, he could kill the other party with a single blow. At that instant, the battle appeared quite lopsided. One party repeatedly cast flashy attacks as he activated different sorts of Grand Daos through his spear, while the other seemed clumsy but unfazed as every move he made exuded immense pressure. Martial Peak, Chapter 5431, Chaotic Time-Space. Not long after the intense battle started, both Yang Kai and the sheep-headed royal lord felt their hearts sinking as they sported solemn expressions. For Yang Kai, even though his strength had increased by several times, he was still no match for the other party. Although there was only a difference of one order between them, it was the biggest gap to cross. When Yang Kai was a fifth-order master, he could kill a sixth-order master. When he was a sixth-order master, he could kill a seventh-order master. When he was a seventh-order master, he could kill a territory lord. However, as an eighth-order open heaven realm master now, he realized he had no hope of killing a ninth-order master with his own strength alone. A royal lord's power was equivalent to that of a ninth-order master. He could even clearly feel that the royal lord still hadn't fully recovered. In other words, The other party wasn't in peak condition, yet he still wasn't a match. Damn it. If this drags on, I'll fall into an unfavorable position. However, if I don't kill this royal lord, I can't keep the secrets of the great sea celestial phenomenon safe. While this was giving young Kai a headache, the royal lord was equally frustrated. The human across from him was significantly more powerful than he was 500 years ago. Although they hadn't been fighting for long, the royal lord came to realize that it wouldn't be easy for him to kill this opponent. There was no doubt this human still wasn't a match for him, but he already had the power to oppose him. Other powerful 8th Order human masters could also probably deal with him for a time, but the royal lord was confident he could kill such enemies sooner or later. However, young Kai was different. This guy was a master of the Tao of space, and the royal lord vividly remembered being unable to capture him despite having pursued him for years 500 years ago. If nothing changed in their current battle, young Kai would probably flee. I can't give him a chance to run, otherwise, I'll never find out what Kang gave him. Kang's trump card must be of critical importance and must be controlled by us. Both of them had different thoughts in their minds, but at that moment, they decided they needed to go all in to defeat the other party at the same time. The next moment, young Kai suddenly leaped away from the royal lord, widening the gap between them. He initially thought that the royal lord would stop him, but instead, the royal lord just let him go. Despite his puzzlement, young Kai didn't have time to ponder on the issue as he dropped the azure dragon spear and began rapidly forming a set of hand seals. A golden crow cawed as a great sun leaped into existence. Following that, a cold full moon rose from behind him as it cast its glow onto the void. The sun and moon appeared at the same time, forming a wondrous vision. The moment the sun and moon manifested, they began orbiting around young Kai, affecting both space and time in the surrounding region. Time principles spread out, while space principles undulated and intertwined with them, forming an entirely new kind of strength. Sun and Moon Divine Wheel. This was the most powerful trump card young Kai could bring out besides his dragon bead. It was also the divine ability he had invented through his own comprehension. Activating it was not difficult, but the prerequisites to cast it were extraordinarily difficult, such that only young Kai was capable of it as it was formed from the resonance of his two strongest grand Taos. Therefore, this divine ability displayed an extraordinary might when he used it. He was unable to use his dragon bead casually, so to deal with this royal lord, young Kai could only rely on his sun and moon divine wheel. If this move wasn't even useful, he would have no choice but to retreat before trying to come up with another way to kill the royal lord. The instant young Kai cast his sun and moon divine wheel, the royal lord also looked up and glared at him. His dark eyes seemed to have turned into a bottomless abyss as though they could devour young Kai. His obsidian eyes reflected young Kai's figure, which was engulfed in endless black ink strength. It was as if he was burning with a dark flame. Royal Lord Secret Technique. At that instant, both young Kai and the Royal Lord brought out their most lethal moves in an attempt to defeat the other party. It could be said that they had made the same judgment in this situation and acted decisively on it. Young Kai was startled as he was quite familiar with the Royal Lord Secret Technique. For the Black Ink clansmen below the Royal Lords, if they wanted to corrupt a human, they just had to release their black ink strength to invade that human's body and small universe. If that human couldn't resist, they would be turned into a black ink disciple. Royal Lords could naturally do the same, but they also had a better and more efficient method, which was known to the humans as the Royal Lord Secret Technique. It was well known among the humans that when a Royal Lord activated the Royal Lord Secret Technique, even an 8th Order Open Heaven Realm Master couldn't resist it, instantly turning them into a black ink disciple. This was one of the reasons the 8th Order Masters didn't interfere carelessly when a 9th Order Old Ancestor battled a Royal Lord. A 9th Order Master could fend off the Royal Lord Secret Technique, but those in the 8th Order couldn't. Once they were struck by the Royal Lord Secret Technique during an intense battle, the humans were bound to suffer immense losses. To deal with a Royal Lord, a 9th Order Master had to personally make a move. The humans had been studying the secrets behind the Royal Lord Secret Technique for years, but they hadn't found out anything useful yet, mainly because no Royal Lord would easily activate the Royal Lord Secret Technique. Without a target they could study or examples they could learn from, the humans obviously couldn't gather any useful information. With that said, the high-ranking officers had speculated that the Royal Lord's secret technique might be a kind of innate divine ability that was exclusive to the Black Ink clan. Only Royal Lords were able to use this innate divine ability, and it was most likely a kind of attack that directly affected one's soul. Certainly, Yang Kai had heard of such information and even experienced it for himself twice in the past, but he was too weak back then to really understand what was happening. Now, having reached the 8th order and possessing incredible soul cultivation, he was finally able to realize that the Royal Lord's secret technique wasn't purely a soul technique, but rather a combination of one with an eye secret technique. When the Royal Lord activated the Royal Lord's secret technique, Yang Kai could clearly see his own reflection in the other party's eyes. The figure was engulfed in thick black ink strength, as though he had really turned into a black ink disciple. At the same time, Yang Kai was indeed covered in black ink strength in reality. The black ink strength was pure, and it was as though it had appeared out of nowhere. At the very least, Yang Kai didn't see his opponent releasing this black ink strength. The thick and pure black ink strength soon penetrated his physique, and despite his best efforts, Yang Kai was unable to resist its invasion. This kind of corrosion was harmless to his body, but the Royal Lord's secret technique was never meant to be lethal. The pure and dense black ink strength invaded Yang Kai's small universe in the blink of an eye, but unlike what would normally happen, the black ink strength just sputtered, like a stone dropping into an ocean. Any other 8th Order Open Heaven Realm Master would have been turned into a black ink disciple and been enslaved to the Royal Lord by now. However, Yang Kai's small universe had the protection of a World Tree clone. He had even planted a low-rank black ink nest in his small universe many years ago to nurture some low-level black ink clansmen to use as training tools for the disciples of the Void Dao Temple. A massive amount of black ink strength had already been suppressed and sealed in his small universe. Therefore, Yang Kai was truly not afraid of its corrosion anymore. Kang once told him that the World Tree clone might not be able to fend off the black ink strength from Mo itself, for he was the source of all black ink strength, but although the sheep-headed Royal Lord was also powerful, he was orders of magnitude weaker than Mo. As such, he could never break through the World Tree clone's protection. Suddenly, Yang Kai realized that the Royal Lord's aura had plunged tremendously after he cast the Royal Lord's secret technique. At that instant, Yang Kai recalled the reason why the Royal Lords wouldn't use the Royal Lord's secret technique unless it was absolutely necessary to do so. That was because there was a price to pay if they wanted to use it. This secret technique was extremely powerful, and it was silent when it was cast. As such, the 8th Order Masters could not hope to defend themselves from it. If the Royal Lords could repeatedly cast it without any restraints, the Black Ink clan would just have to send a Royal Lord to wander around the battlefield to turn all the 8th Order Masters into Black Ink disciples. Once that happened, the human race would be doomed. However, since there was clearly a big price to pay, the Royal Lords wouldn't use the Royal Lord's secret technique as they pleased lest the 9th Order Masters seize the chance and kill them. Obviously, the life of a Royal Lord was far more important than a few 8th Order Open Heaven Realm Masters. Upon that realization, Yang Kai started grinning. He was still engulfed in black ink strength, making him look extremely evil. He was initially worried that his Sun and Moon Divine will might not be powerful enough to deal with this Royal Lord. Nevertheless, the latter had been significantly weakened after he activated the Royal Lord's secret technique. As such, the Sun and Moon Divine will would probably be quite deadly to him. Just as Yang Kai was affected by the Royal Lord's secret technique and his entire figure was covered in black ink strength, the power of the swirling sun and moon reached the Royal Lord. Yang Kai's eyes brightened as he was secretly thrilled. It wasn't the first time he used the Sun and Moon Divine Wheel. In fact, he had cast this divine ability many times back then to deal with opponents who were more powerful than he was. However, the Sun and Moon Divine Wheel had never been more powerful than it was now. It was to the point where even Yang Kai felt the divine ability was unusually powerful on this day. There was no denying it had something to do with his advancement in the Tao of Time. However, he reckoned the biggest reason was that he had reached a form of equilibrium. In the past, his mastery over the Tao of Space had always been greater than his mastery over the Tao of Time. Before he headed to the no-return pass, His mastery over the Tao of Space had already reached the 8th level, while his mastery over the Tao of Time was only on the 6th level. After the training in the dragon pool, the power of his dragon vein increased tremendously, which resulted in his mastery over the Tao of Time reaching the 7th level. When he was cultivating in the Great Sea celestial phenomenon, Yang Kai managed to absorb and refine several dozen temporal rivers, thus pushing his Tao of Time to the 8th level, which was on the same level as his Tao of Space. In the past, when he activated his Sun and Moon Divine Wheel, Yang Kai realized that there was an imbalance between the space principles and time principles that composed the attack. This kind of imbalance stopped the Sun and Moon Divine Wheel from unleashing its full potential. He had speculated that once both of his grand Taos reached a state of balance, he would see a significant increase in the power of his Sun and Moon Divine Wheel. Now, it seemed that his speculation was right. As the powers of both grand Taos intertwined, they showcased an entirely new space-time strength, which seemed to resonate with the universe itself. The instant the Royal Lord cast the Royal Lord secret technique, his expression changed drastically. His aura was frail at this moment, and faced with the Sun and Moon Divine Wheel, he couldn't help feeling that his life was at risk. The Royal Lord madly surged his black ink strength in an attempt to drive it off. However, affected by the strange space-time strength, his mind and movements became sluggish. Before he could come to his senses, the Sun and Moon Divine Will had already struck his figure. An invisible impact then spread across the void. The Sun and Moon exploded and formed into a massive sphere of light. At that instant, time and space seemed to have fallen into a chaotic state. Even Yang Kai, the one who cast this divine ability, felt that everything seemed to have turned upside down. Martial Peak, Chapter 5432, The True Might. At that moment, Yang Kai widened his eyes and looked fixedly at the light sphere. Although tears started sliding down his cheeks in response to the dazzling light, he still didn't close his eyes. That was because he was seeing something inconceivable. There seemed to be some images flashing across the light sphere. In the images, he saw a vague figure that was engulfed in black ink strength with a big head in his hand. Black blood was seen spilling from the head, and countless black ink clansmen surrounded the figure as though they were worshipping him. Before he could see anything clearly though, the images had disappeared, and the images he saw next were even more stunning. Thriving stars and universe worlds filled with vitality were shrouded in black ink strength as they soon turned into barren wastelands void of any life. These images soon disappeared as well. Then, he saw a humongous tree that appeared to be sick. The leaves had withered, and even the fruits on the tree were shriveled. They appeared so wrinkled as though they had been exposed to sunlight for years on end. Strange images continued to flicker through the light sphere, but they all disappeared before Yang Kai could look into them. As such, he couldn't take in the details. In just a moment, over 100 scenes had flashed past the light sphere, which was soon replaced by darkness as though there was no longer any light in the universe. Yang Kai fell into a dazed state. What were those images? He had activated the Sun and Moon Divine Wheel before, but he had never seen such a strange phenomenon. The light sphere had disappeared before he could figure anything out. Engulfed in the Sun and Moon Divine Wheel, the sheep-headed Royal Lord was soaked in black blood, and his face had been transformed by horror. His aura had already turned weak after he used the Royal Lord's secret technique, and it now seemed even more frail. He had seen the images at the same time as Yang Kai, however, even Yang Kai had no idea what those things were, so how was he supposed to know? Moreover, he wasn't in the mood to ponder on it. The power of the Sun and Moon Divine Will had exceeded Yang Kai's expectations and had also gone beyond the Royal Lord's imagination. The amazing space-time strength was now corroding the Royal Lord's mind and body, making him suffer indescribable pain. However, he still felt confident that the dust had settled. No human could resist the Royal Lord's secret technique, or at least the Royal Lord thought so, as the next instant, his expression changed drastically, for Yang Kai, who was covered in black ink strength, suddenly grinned mockingly at him. For universe pillars. These words sprang into the Royal Lord's mind in an instant. The Royal Lord's secret technique wasn't without its archnemesis. The 4 universe pillars could block the Royal Lord's secret technique, ensuring that the humans who possessed one of them wouldn't be corrupted by black ink strength. However, as far as the Royal Lord knew, Precious treasures like the 4 universe pillars were extremely rare throughout the entire universe, therefore, only a small number of humans would possess one. The royal lord had never expected that the human he had been hunting down had one as well. He had heard that precious treasures like the 4 universe pillars were always owned by the strongest 8th Order masters. This human was only in the 7th Order 500 years ago, so why did he have one of the 4 universe pillars as well? At that instant, the royal lord deeply regretted activating the royal lord secret technique, which caused him to be weakened. Otherwise, he would have been able to deal with the opponent's strange divine ability. He was already weakened to begin with, and he was subsequently struck by the opponent's divine ability, which exacerbated his condition. Realizing he was in a dangerous situation, the royal lord's figure shook as he used a secret technique. At the same time, the royal lord black ink nest which was planted nearby started transmitting black ink strength to him, allowing his aura to surge. His black ink nest wasn't far away, so he could make use of it to improve his condition. Although he looked battered, everything was still well within his control. He still had a chance to kill this human. The moment the royal lord drew energy from his black ink nest though, Yang Kai's facial features warped, as though he was going through some excruciating pain. He then howled in agony. The royal lord was startled, but before he could figure out what was wrong with Yang Kai, a howl of even greater intensity burst from his lips. At that moment, he felt an immense force tearing apart the defense of his soul and badly damaging it. Coupled with the space-time strength's influence, his mind went completely blank. Soul-rending thorn. When Yang Kai asked Grandmaster Ma Fan to refine soul-rending thorns for him for the first time, the latter crafted 12 for him to use. Then, Yang Kai used 11 of them in the fight for the mid-rank black ink nest, which resulted in him badly injuring or killing the equivalent number of territory lords and 8th Order black ink disciples. After that, outside the royal city in Great Evolution Theater, he used the last one to kill Che Kong. With such a record of success, Yang Kai naturally made sure to get more soul-rending thorns for himself. When the Great Evolution Army set off on their second crusade, Yang Kai gathered some materials and asked Grandmaster Ma Fan to make more soul-rending thorns for him. It took Grandmaster Ma Fan some time and energy to do so, but now Yang Kai had several dozen soul-rending thorns with him and had been hiding them from the enemies. Even when he cast the Sun and Moon Divine Wheel earlier, he did not use them. That was because he would be the first one injured before he could harm his opponent. Using a soul-rending thorn would result in mutual injuries, therefore, Yang Kai wouldn't use one unless it was necessary to do so. Now, it had come to a point where he had no choice but to use them. The royal lord was indeed powerful. Even though his soul had been struck by the soul-rending thorn and space-time strength, he still managed to pull himself together quickly, but when he looked up, he realized Yang Kai was nowhere to be found. When his mind was blank earlier, Yang Kai had vanished. Reacting on instinct, he turned around as he widened his eyes and roared, "You caught death." Above the dead universe world where his black ink nest was located, Yang Kai's figure abruptly appeared. He wielded his spear as his weapon turned into a spear light and struck the royal lord's black ink nest. Yang Kai didn't directly attack the royal lord because he didn't have the confidence to kill him with one strike. It was difficult to deal with a royal lord at the peak of his power. Old ancestor Xiao Xiao was unable to succeed back then under similar circumstances, so Yang Kai naturally wouldn't think he could do any better. Therefore, he believed that it would be best for him to seize the chance and destroy the other party's black ink nest. A black ink nest could not run away or counterattack, after all. Yang Kai had learned his lesson in the Great Evolution Royal City back then, so he held nothing back this time. As the spear light slashed across the black ink nest, it was cut clean in half. Spear intent burst forth and vaporized the black ink nest down to its roots. All the black ink clansmen in the black ink nest were killed in an instant as their auras disappeared. The next moment, the low-rank black ink nests around the Great Sea started collapsing and withering as they had lost their support. Without the support from their source, which was the royal lord's black ink nest, all the low-rank black ink nests were doomed to perish. With his spear in hand, Yang Kai turned around and faced the royal lord, who was coming at him. His facial features contorted in pain, But the murderous intent behind his gaze seemed to have materialized as he pointed his spear forward and roared, "It's your turn." The royal lord had just reached the peak of his power before his aura plunged again to the point where it was worse than before. Faced with the glistening spear, he felt panic for the very first time. The other party was indeed weaker than him, but after they exchanged finishing moves, he was the one badly injured. He couldn't help but think if the fight dragged on, he would be killed by his opponent. Soon, however, he cast his fear away and grit his teeth as he charged towards Yang Kai. His expression was more hideous than that of his opponent, for it had come to a point where there was no turning back. Today, one of them would fall, there was no other possible outcome. Yang Kai remained unwavering. As they brushed past each other in the void, their blood spattered and they growled at the same time. This couldn't be helped, as Yang Kai seized the chance to use another soul-rending thorn during their exchange of moves. While his soul was again wounded, the royal lord wasn't feeling any better. Yang Kai had the soul-warming lotus, so he wasn't worried about his soul being damaged too much, but the same couldn't be said for the royal lord. The moment they stabilized their figures, they turned around and charged at each other again. In the void, countless black ink clansmen surrounded them in all directions. Knowing that he was in a perilous situation, the royal lord intended to make use of his subordinates. Unfortunately for him, back then, he abstained from spawning any territory lords to save some energy, so his most powerful subordinates were only feudal lords. The royal lord wasn't sure if such an army could pose any threat to Yang Kai, but it had come to a point where he had no choice but to give it a try. Yang Kai had apparently realized this as well. Under normal circumstances, he would certainly have no regard for these feudal lords, but the situation now was different. Presently, he was surrounded by millions of black ink clansmen, and he had to deal with the royal lord at the same time. If he wasn't careful enough, he might lose his life here. Therefore, he became even more ruthless with his moves as he madly activated the soul-rending thorns. After using a fourth soul-rending thorn, Yang Kai realized he had fallen into a dazed state. He secretly cursed because he had used too many soul-rending thorns and had now affected the very foundation of his soul. If he continued to use the soul-rending thorns, his soul would be ripped apart before he could even kill the royal lord. When that happened, even the soul-warming lotus couldn't save him. These thoughts all occurred in a flash before his mind suddenly turned blank as he was no longer able to think clearly. Then, he lost consciousness. Some unknown amount of time later, Yang Kai abruptly came to his senses when he felt a cool sensation. His head was in pain as his soul had been badly damaged, which made him unable to think clearly. It was only thanks to the soul-warming lotus that he could even regain consciousness. Following that, Yang Kai realized he was surrounded by enemies that stretched out into the distance with no end in sight. They were the Black Ink clan soldiers. At this moment, he was fighting against the Black Ink clan soldiers, and wherever he went, blood flowed like rivers as countless Black Ink clan corpses littered the void. Despite the fact that he was unconscious earlier, his body honed by hundreds of years of combat reacted instinctively to kill the enemies, which saved his life. Otherwise, the feudal lords would have been able to kill him. He considered himself lucky that there were no territory lords among the Black Ink clansmen, otherwise, he wouldn't have stood a chance to survive. The next instant, he realized the royal lord was nowhere in sight. Where is he? The reason he fell into a stupor was because he had activated too many soul-rending thorns. His soul was unable to bear the damage brought about by 4 repeated sacrifices. Since he had fallen into such a state, he reckoned that the royal lord wasn't in a better condition either, despite the fact that the latter was stronger. However, now that he was awake, he couldn't detect the royal lord's aura. Did he run away? No. Suddenly, Yang Kai looked down at his hand and realized he was holding a huge head with sheep horns. This head's eyes were still wide open as though he was unresigned before his death. Black blood could be seen dripping from his severed neck. At that instant, Yang Kai realized he had seen such a sight before. Marshall Peak, Chapter 5433, Spying on the Future. The sheep-headed royal lord was dead. What was certain was that the royal lord died by Yang Kai's hand, but Yang Kai didn't know exactly how he had decapitated the royal lord. He also didn't know why he was holding the royal lord's head in his hand. In this situation, there was no way Yang Kai could think clearly, and when he tried, he just felt dizzier. He knew this was because his soul was seriously injured. So far, he had relied on the fact that he had the soul-warming lotus and had done many risky things. However, the injury to his soul this time was something that could not be compared to any other in the past. The consequences were huge, but the result was worth it. He had killed a royal lord. This was also the very first royal lord he personally killed all by himself. Although he had previously killed a ninth-order Black Ink disciple in the royal city of Great Evolution Theatre, that Black Ink disciple's actual strength was much inferior to a royal lord's, not to mention that he only delivered the last lucky blow while the opponent had his guard down. The opponent's small universe was already extremely unstable after taking a blow from old ancestor Xiao Xiao, and Yang Kai just happened to have the means to defeat him. Using the unique features of his cow punch, Yang Kai was able to send his opponent to his death with just one punch. Thus, the killing of that ninth-order Black Ink disciple was more of a lucky accident rather than a show of strength and skill. But this was a real battle. Since being chased after by the sheep-headed royal lord from outside the primordial heaven's source grand restriction, Yang Kai had faced innumerable dangers, used up a lot of time, and was even forced into the Great Sea Celestial phenomenon to save himself during his escape. However, the winner was king, while the loser was the villain. He was still alive, while the sheep-headed royal lord was dead. At that moment, Yang Kai felt a sudden sense of satisfaction rise in him. He felt his 4,000 years of dull cultivation didn't go to waste, nor did the countless resources he used when in the temporal rivers inside the Great Sea Celestial phenomenon. It just so happened that the cultivation that lasted who knows how many actual years in the outside world had given him the strength to kill a royal lord in a head-on battle. Of course, the consequences he suffered weren't minor either. Yang Kai could tell that several of his bones were broken, and golden blood was oozing from a penetrating wound on his lower abdomen, seemingly having been inflicted by the sheep-headed royal lord's claws. Also, one of his arms and one of his legs were bent in a strange way, with the most serious injury being the one to his soul. After using the soul-rending thorn 4 consecutive times in short order, Yang Kai felt about half of his soul had been sacrificed. In fact, if it had been anyone else, that person would have already died. It was also because he had the soul-warming lotus that Yang Kai was able to stay alive and regain consciousness. The successful killing of the sheep-headed royal lord was not only because of his efforts, but also luck. If such a battle were to happen again, Yang Kai couldn't guarantee that he would be the ultimate winner. Now, he indeed had the capital to fight against a royal lord, but there was still quite a large gap between their real strength. Yang Kai felt groggy, as he could not keep himself conscious for much longer. He was barely able to stay awake and felt like he was suspended in water while constantly sinking into the abyss. This was because his soul was desperate to shut down and sleep to heal. In the end, Yang Kai sank into a state of semi-consciousness again just moments after it had woken up. Though his mind fell into a daze, his body didn't stop killing the enemy. When Yang Kai woke up the second time, his injuries seemed to have worsened even more. The Black Ink clansmen were still besieging him from all directions, and he was continuously killing the enemies as if this battle would never end. Having his mind falling asleep and waking up several times, Yang Kai didn't know how much time had passed, but eventually, he woke up to find himself simply standing in the void. His body was exuding a heavy murderous aura that was so potent it seemed like it could condense into a tangible substance, while all around him were corpses and pieces of the Black Ink clansmen. There were so many that it seemed like they were going to fill up the entire void. As for Yang Kai, he was currently standing tall above the mountain of corpses. At some point, his killing spree had stopped. There was not a living Black Ink clansman in sight, though Yang Kai wasn't sure if he had killed them all. However, judging by the remains on the battlefield, he guessed that even if some Black Ink clan soldiers had escaped, there wouldn't be too many of them. He had killed at least 70% of the Black Ink clan army here. The strongest among this Black Ink clan army were only feudal lords, so even if they escaped, it wouldn't make much difference because the dangers they would face in this region of the deep void were great, even for someone like Yang Kai. Without a truly powerful master protecting them, they would all die in this place sooner or later. Lowering his head to look at his hands, Yang Kai discovered the head of the sheep-headed royal lord he was holding when he woke up the first time was gone. Perhaps he had unknowingly lost it at some point. But he wasn't concerned with that. After having a look around his surroundings, he found a universe fragment. The Black Ink clan had moved here before stuffing a handful of spirit pills into his mouth and began to adjust his breathing and recuperate. The injuries to his soul had yet to heal, but they were constantly being nourished and repaired by the soul-warming lotus, so their condition was better. If that wasn't the case, he wouldn't have been able to wake up several times. On the other hand, the injuries on his body were very severe. After all, there were a multitude of Black Ink clansmen here, so even if their strongest were only feudal lords, that was still enough to pose a huge threat to him. His body was covered in wounds of all sizes that were too numerous to count. Many of them were even layered atop old wounds. Fortunately for him, the royal lord was dead, and he had killed who knows how many Black Ink clansmen, so there was no one here to disturb him while he was healing. The first thing Yang Kai did was to reconnect all his broken bones before correcting his twisted arm and leg, which made him break out in cold sweat during the process. After doing all that, he carefully checked his body internally and externally to ensure there weren't any hidden injuries. Having done so, he did find something that made his face twitch. His dragon bead had cracked again. During the 4,000 years he had been cultivating in the Great Sea, his previously damaged dragon bead had already been fully restored. Now that the dragon bead had cracked again, it meant that he had activated his dragon bead while in his hazy state. There was no need to even guess though, it was undoubtedly the royal lord who had damaged his dragon bead again. It seemed like the sheep-headed royal lord didn't die without a fight. At the beginning of their battle, the royal lord was already not in peak condition, then he used his royal lord secret technique which had weakened his strength, making it difficult for him to resist the blast from the sun and moon divine wheel. At that point, he could be said to be severely injured. Following that, Yang Kai used 4 soul-rending thorns in a row, which tore into the royal lord's soul, causing massive damage. Therefore, when Yang Kai summoned his dragon bead, the royal lord's end was set in stone. Just thinking about it, Yang Kai couldn't help shivering slightly. Since his body could instinctually kill enemies while he was in a semi-conscious state, it would naturally be the same for the royal lord, who was far stronger. Yang Kai couldn't even imagine what would have happened if the royal lord had shattered his dragon bead when he summoned it in his fugue state. Thinking of the royal lord, Yang Kai thought about something else. When he woke up the first time, he was holding the royal lord's head while being surrounded by countless Black Ink clan soldiers. That scene closely resembled one of the scenes he saw after using the sun and moon divine wheel. Back then, he thought the Black Ink clan that had surrounded him were showing their admiration for something, but now it seemed like they weren't admiring anything, they were clearly besieging him to kill him. Yang Kai was shocked. How can this be? Could the scene I saw be the scene I just experienced? After activating the sun and moon divine wheel, he did have the feeling that time itself had become chaotic. Could the misalignment of time lead to me being able to foresee future events? Instinctively, Yang Kai wanted to deny this conjecture, but one of the flashing scenes he had seen at the time slowly became clearer in his mind, and he discovered that it was very similar to the scene he saw when he first woke up. The moment time became warped, the first scene Yang Kai saw was a figure holding a detached head. The figure looked almost identical to him, but the face was blurred, and no matter how Yang Kai tried to recall it, he couldn't make out who it was. He then shuddered. If that is true, then what do the other scenes I saw represent? Could they be future events as well? He had seen many scenes back then, but most disappeared immediately after appearing, so he couldn't determine what they were. Still, there were a few scenes that he was able to see clearly. Prosperous stars and universe worlds that were full of vitality being enveloped by Black Ink strength, rapidly turning into wastelands devoid of life. There was also a gigantic tree that seemed to be sick. Its branches and leaves were shriveled, and even its fruits lacked any luster as they shriveled up as if they had been exposed to the sun for too long. As for the universe worlds that had their vitality destroyed and turned into wastelands after being enveloped by Black Ink strength, that scene might correspond to what might happen if the Black Ink clan invaded the 3,000 worlds. If the Black Ink clan had successfully invaded the 3,000 worlds, there was no doubt that such a future would happen. What about that gigantic tree? Could it be the World Tree? At that point, Yong-kai suddenly recalled Kang's words. He said that the World Tree was almost as old as the universe itself, and its appearance wasn't that different from when Mo was spawned, which appeared when the heavens and earth first split apart. Moreover, the World Tree had an inexplicable relationship with the 3,000 worlds. Kang, the other 9 martial ancestors, and even Yong-kai himself were means by which this vast universe tried to help itself by exerting its rules through the World Tree. Kang and the others had gotten a gift from the World Tree and were able to enlighten themselves about the martial Tao while comprehending the method of reaching the open heaven realm, earning them the title of martial ancestors. Yong-kai was also barely considered to have received a gift from the World Tree as he had obtained a root from it. Since ancient times, others must have entered the grand ancient ruins boundary and received gifts from the World Tree. These were all the universe's means to save itself, but unfortunately, those people seemed to have all failed and fallen. Suppose the World Tree and the 3,000 worlds did have an unbreakable connection. If the Black Ink clan invaded the 3,000 worlds and turned all the flourishing lands into wastelands, plunging the entire universe into turmoil, then the appearance of the World Tree that seemed like it was severely ill. The more Yong-kai thought about it, the more he sweated. He couldn't help but shake his head to disperse those thoughts from his mind. However, he didn't expect that when he moved, his head felt like it had turned into mush and the pain was so intense that he almost passed out again. Luckily, after such an interruption, he did not have the intention to think about such nonsense anymore. The ability to foresee the future was too surreal to Yong-kai, so he wasn't willing to believe it was possible. Even though the space-time strength he used was mysterious as well, it was just a type of strength that made use of his comprehension of the grand Taos of space and time. How could such strength break through the flow of time itself and allow one to peer into the future? Healing my injuries is more important. A while later, cold sweat began dripping from Yong-kai's forehead. No matter how much he refused to believe it, he could vaguely sense that he seemed to have obtained a glimpse of the future. The sun and moon divine wheel had warped and broken time to the point that it let him witness events that had yet to transpire. Marshall Peak, Chapter 5434, A Destroyed Great Pass. After a year of focusing all his efforts on recuperating, Yong-kai had almost made a full recovery. Emerging from the universe fragment, Yong-kai observed his surroundings for a while before his figure dashed in the direction of the Black Ink nest. Though the high-rank Black Ink nest exploded after his attack, there were still some remnants left behind. After searching through the debris, Yong-kai found quite a lot of resources. These resources were mined by the Black Ink clan from surrounding areas. The Black Ink clan had a high demand for resources when spawning more of their members, and the Royal Lord also needed resources to heal his injuries. All these unused resources now belonged to Yong-kai. However, he did not intend to use these resources on himself, nor did he intend to further his cultivation at this moment. He scavenged for these resources because he wanted to arrange a universe array. The Great Sea Celestial Phenomenon was a natural treasure trove, and Yong-kai wasn't sure if he would be able to find it again after leaving, so he decided to leave a universe array here, which might be of use someday. In fact, he still had quite a lot of resources on hand, but he was lacking some critical components. It just happened that the resources he found from the Black Ink nest were enough to make up for the shortage. Soon, a universe array took shape in what was left of the universe world where the high-rank Black Ink nest was originally situated. Yong-kai then made some arrangements to cover up and conceal the universe array. After taking a good look at the Great Sea Celestial Phenomenon, Yong-kai turned around and left. All that was left now in this vast stretch of void were densely scattered corpses that seemed to be a sign that there was once a tragic battle here. Previously, outside the primordial heavens source grand restriction, where he was targeted by the Royal Lord and chased all the way here, Yong-kai planned to follow the path the humans took during their crusade back to the no-return pass to seek help from the Dragon and Phoenix clans to defeat the Royal Lord. Unfortunately, he got lost on the way, and the longer he ran, the more unsure he was of where he was heading. Now, he didn't even know where he was or which way he should travel now. But he wasn't too worried about it because he knew he would eventually find his way back, he just needed to take some time. Another thing that made him feel helpless was that he didn't know how much time had passed. He could accurately calculate the time he spent in the Great Sea celestial phenomenon, but he had no idea about how much time had passed in the outside world. The speed of time in each temporal river was different, so there was no way to make an accurate estimate. I wonder what happened after the war between the two races. When Yang Kai escaped from the primordial heaven's source grand restriction, Kang fused his body with the restriction to summon the energy Mu needed to leave Mo in deep sleep. Just before making that sacrifice, Kang left his backup plan to Yang Kai, which was extremely important. It was because the Black Ink clan saw this take place right before their eyes that Yang Kai was targeted by a royal lord. Now that things had gotten to this point, Yang Kai did not resent Kang because he was the only person Kang could trust during that last moment. After all, he was also one of the means chosen by the vast universe. To be able to be chosen meant that Yang Kai was special in some way. Therefore, if it were Yang Kai, he would make the same choice as Kang. But no matter how that battle ended, the human army couldn't stay at the primordial heaven's source grand restriction. If the humans won, they would definitely withdraw their forces. If they were defeated, they would still retreat back to the no-return pass to join forces with the Dragon and Phoenix clans because that was the only way they could resist the Black Ink clan army's attack. That was why Yang Kai only had one destination in mind, the no-return pass. In his current situation, it would be difficult for Yang Kai to be certain which direction would lead to the no-return pass, but as long as he could find the late ancient era battlefield, he would be able to estimate his whereabouts. Flying through the void, Yang Kai's figure soared along at amazing speed. He would stop every half a month or so to activate the universe transference law to try and connect to any of the universe arrays he had set inside those purifying Black Ink battleships. However, the only universe array he could sense was the one he set up next to the Great Sea celestial phenomenon. Such a situation meant that his distance from those universe arrays was too great for the universe transference law to even detect them. Although he couldn't sense the position of any purifying Black Ink battleship, this tactic wasn't useless because, at the very least, he could use the universe array he left at the Great Sea celestial phenomenon to deduce his current position. As time passed, his connection with the universe array at the Great Sea celestial phenomenon became vague, which told Yang Kai that he was getting further away from the Great Sea celestial phenomenon. It was not until half a year later that he could no longer sense that universe array. With the speed he could travel, coupled with instantaneous movement, Yang Kai still used about half a year before he lost all contact with the Great Sea celestial phenomenon, which showed how vast an area a universe array could cover. There were celestial phenomena of all shapes and sizes in the void, and Yang Kai had seen many of them while he was escaping from the sheep-headed royal lord. He even dove deep into a dense fog celestial phenomenon and the Great Sea celestial phenomenon. But since he was running for his life to avoid being killed, he didn't have the time to enjoy the beauty of these celestial phenomena along the way. Now that he was feeling more relaxed, he had time to study these celestial phenomena more carefully and even found them quite miraculous. These celestial phenomena might be the manifestation of the universe's original form and might. Many radiated extremely dangerous auras, while some of them were deep and unfathomable. Just like the Great Sea celestial phenomenon, though they looked tranquil and calm on the outside, one would only know of the dangers lurking inside after entering them. The 3,000 worlds didn't have any celestial phenomena, possibly because of all the activities of human cultivators causing them to fade away. Wait, the 3,000 worlds does have some. Yang Kai suddenly recalled rumors about some strange forbidden zones in several great territories. Those forbidden zones were filled with dangers, and they were very difficult for ordinary cultivators to even approach. Those so-called forbidden zones might be remnants of ancient celestial phenomena. They weren't complete anymore and only retained a portion of their mysteries and might. As time passed, coupled with repeated explorations by cultivators, those forbidden zones would also gradually disappear into the annals of history. Suppose one could explore the mysteries of these celestial phenomena. Maybe one could use the opportunity to gain insight into the true meaning of the power of the heavens and earth. That thought flashed across Yang Kai's mind as he flew past different celestial phenomena. Year after year, his dull voyage continued in solitude. The void was incredibly vast, and it contained all sorts of wonders, but he wasn't anxious because he knew it was no use being anxious. Along the way, Yang Kai left hidden marks inside some dead universe worlds, making it easier for him to find his way back to the Great Sea Celestial phenomenon. Suddenly, on a particular day when he used the universe transference law, Yang Kai finally sensed a universe array in a particular direction. The distance was still quite far away, and the connection he felt was exceptionally weak, but if he exerted all his efforts to get there, he could probably arrive within half a year. Yang Kai was elated. All his efforts had paid off as he finally discovered something and hurriedly moved in that direction. A few days later, he used the universe transference law to determine his position. Another few days later, it was still the same. 1 month later, after Yang Kai used the universe transference law again, he frowned. Over this 1 month's time, he had used the universe transference law 5 times, and although he could establish a connection with the faraway target, there was something wrong with the situation. He was now rushing there with all his might and had activated the space principles, so his speed was exceptionally fast. Therefore, it was reasonable to say that he could have easily shortened the distance between them in this 1 month's time, and the nearer the distance with the universe array, the stronger the connection he had with it when using the universe transference law. But the reality was that the connection was still very weak. There were only 2 possibilities that could cause such a situation. One was that the universe array he was connecting with was also continuously moving forward and was keeping a constant distance from Yang Kai. However, a purifying black ink battleship speed was incomparable to Yang Kai's, so even if it was somehow moving in exactly the same direction as him, the distance would still have been greatly shortened. Which meant it could only be the second possibility. The universe array he had set up in this purifying battleship was damaged. Yang Kai had arranged the universe arrays in the very heart of the purifying ink battleships, along with the storage room for purifying light, and after all the great passes had obtained their purifying black ink battleships, they specifically reinforced the defenses around the universe array to the point that it could be said that it would not be damaged unless the purifying black ink battleship was completely crippled. But now, the universe array on this unidentified purifying black ink battleship was actually damaged. So what about the purifying black ink battleship itself? Did they encounter some kind of battle? Were there still survivors there? Yang Kai was so anxious that he pushed his speed even harder. 2 months later, Yang Kai estimated it was about the distance that he could transmit with his now 8th order open heaven realm cultivation and strong physique. Also, it wouldn't be too risky to teleport at this point, so he used the universe transference law, wanting to use the universe array and directly transport himself onto that purifying black ink battleship. However, when the patterns of a grand array lit up under his feet, there was no sign of transmittance. With a deep frown on his face, Yang Kai discarded this plan and continued to move forward under his own power. It seemed that the universe array he had sensed was indeed damaged to the point that it was no longer functional. Along his way, Yang Kai kept his vigilance up, guarding against the possibility that there might be enemies lurking nearby. Another 2 months passed when Yang Kai suddenly looked up and could vaguely make out a lofty shadow standing tall inside the void. It was a great pass. Even though it was still quite far away, and the visibility inside the void wasn't too good, he could still make out an outline of a huge great pass. Yang Kai's mind suddenly shook as his figure dashed forward. However, as the distance shortened, Yang Kai's heart also gradually sank. It was indeed a great pass, but it was a destroyed one. The originally majestic-looking great pass was now in ruins with large holes broken in its thick walls. Outside the great pass were scattered corpses of soldiers from both races and fragments of broken human warships. Yang Kai's figure gradually slowed down as he passed through the mountain of corpses and blood, feeling suffocated. He didn't know what kind of battle this great pass had encountered, but judging from the gruesome scene before him, it was one filled with brutal bloodshed. Marshall Peak, Chapter 5435, Destroyed Azure Void Pass. Outside the destroyed Great Pass, Yang Kai forced down his anxiety and released his divine sense like a flood, wanting to find any trace of vitality that might still be around. However, it was clear that this battle ended many years ago, so if there were any survivors, how could they still be here? Moreover, he couldn't sense any signs of vitality. Crossing the battlefield that looked like a hellscape, Yang Kai arrived above the Great Pass and looked down. What he saw was the ruined interior of the Great Pass with corpses scattered everywhere. Yang Kai's face fell. Although he didn't know what kind of battle the humans of this Great Pass had gone through, he could guess just by looking at the scene before him. The Black Ink clan army broke through this Great Pass defenses and swarmed inside, engaging in a battle to the death with the human soldiers. Soon, he saw a purifying Black Ink battleship that was broken in two and sensed the weak connection coming from the universe array inside of it. It was this particular universe array that had led him over here. Which Great Pass is this? Yang Kai couldn't figure this out from just a cursory examination, so he continued his search and soon came to the inner sanctum. The inner sanctum of every Great Pass, specifically the central square, could be said to be a human army's drill ground. Now that he looked at this place, he could see obvious traces that were left behind from the battle, as there were numerous Black Ink clan corpses littered around the area. Those dead Black Ink clan soldiers were piled up layer by layer and almost covered the entire central square. And in the center of all those dead Black Ink clan soldiers was an empty space where a figure was quietly sitting cross-legged with both eyes wide open and a peaceful expression. At that moment, Yang Kai felt like his heart was being squeezed by an invisible hand. He slowly walked forward, cleaning out a path among the piles of corpses before arriving before the figure. The two pairs of eyes met each other, and Yang Kai felt a deep sense of sorrow fill his heart. He now knew which Great Pass this was. Azure Void Pass. Although each Great Pass had similar layouts, Yang Kai had visited Azure Void Pass many times and was quite familiar with this place. It was because Azure Void Pass was a complete mess after the Great Battle that Yang Kai couldn't immediately recognize it. However, he did recognize the peaceful-looking fallen cultivator sitting cross-legged in the middle of the courtyard. It was the Ninth Order Open Heaven Realm Old Ancestor of Azure Void Pass. He was the one who gave Yang Kai a piece of beef all those centuries ago. That beef was cooked into soup and allowed Shu Ling Gong to gain a burst of enlightenment and break through to the Eighth Order Open Heaven Realm. The old ancestor of Azure Void Pass had died in battle here. Even in the last moments of his life, he still didn't give up on the Great Pass he protected. Thinking of that, Yang Kai felt his vision becoming a little blurry. Beside the old ancestor of Azure Void Pass was the ox monster, which was missing one of its horns that the old ancestor had kept for numerous years. Old ancestor Xiao Xiao had her eyes on this ox monster for a long while but never succeeded in getting it. At this moment, the ox monster was in the same situation as Azure Void Pass old ancestor. Its body was covered in wounds while its other horn was broken as well. Even its tail was nowhere to be seen. The ox monster quietly lay beside Azure Void Pass old ancestor with its head lowered. Yang Kai blinked a few times to dispel the blurriness in his vision. Then, he faced the old ancestor of Azure Void Pass and bowed with a solemn expression. "I vow to live and die together with the Great Pass." That was the oath that every soldier in every Great Passes swore. Azure Void Pass old ancestor had fulfilled that oath. Every soldier in Azure Void Pass had done so. For numerous years, countless human soldiers died on the Black Ink battlefield to protect the 3,000 worlds, and the Ninth Order Open Heaven Realm old ancestors weren't an exception. No matter their cultivation or status, these humans who died fighting the Black Ink clan were all honorable warriors. Their corpses shouldn't be left out in the void to rot. Since Yang Kai wasn't able to join this battle and had coincidentally arrived here, it wouldn't be a problem for him to help gather these corpses. When he rose to his feet, he suddenly saw the ox monster beside Azure Void Pass old ancestor raising its head and saying, "Take the old ancestor's corpse. If you encounter another supreme master, it can help you defend yourself against the enemy." Yang Kai was elated. "Senior Ox, are you still alive?" However, the ox monster didn't answer his question but continued, "There's no need to hesitate. This is also the old ancestor's last wish before he died. If his corpse could be used to kill a few more enemies, he would surely feel happy in the afterlife." After that, the ox monster again closed his eyes and silently laid its head down. Yang Kai's expression darkened. It seemed like the ox monster had already died as well. The reason it was able to speak might be due to the effect of some secret technique. If the being that came here was human, The ox monster would speak and tell that person to store away the old ancestor's corpse, but if it were a black ink clansman, things might not be that simple. Since the old ancestor's corpse could also be used as a weapon still, it must be because the old ancestor had left some kind of last will behind before his death. This final will probably held extraordinary power, and it was after hearing this that young Kai suddenly realized why the corpse of Azure Void Pass old ancestor was able to remain undisturbed here. The only enemy who could face an old ancestor was a royal lord, and young Kai could see that the injuries on the old ancestor's body were not left by just one royal lord. Just by looking at those injuries, young Kai could distinguish the auras left by 3 royal lords. In other words, before Azure Void Pass old ancestor died, he had fought at least 3 royal lords but was unable to defeat them and died. As for why the 3 royal lords didn't choose to destroy the old ancestor's body and simply left it here, they must have seen that Azure Void Pass old ancestor left behind that last will and were afraid to do anything, lest they encounter an accident. If it hadn't been for that, Azure Void Pass old ancestor's body would have already been destroyed. Considering all this, young Kai felt his heart clench. If the royal lords noticed this, how could they not leave some people behind to monitor the situation to avoid any surviving human soldiers from approaching this place? Just as he was thinking so, young Kai suddenly raised his head and looked up. What he saw were 3 figures suddenly appearing from inside Azure Void Pass, each with a majestic aura. They were territory lords. The Black Ink clan had indeed left guards behind. A royal lord couldn't wait here for such a reason, but a few territory lords could be spared for such a duty. If 3 territory lords worked together, they could deal with most situations. Among those 3 territory lords, one of them had a seductive figure and a flirtatious expression, which reminded young Kai of the Charm Demon clan. There was also a tall and strong territory lord that looked more than 3 times taller than the seductive territory lord. 2 fangs were poking out from both sides of his lips and curved upwards, making him look hideous like he was a crazy wild boar. The third one looked more normal and had many human traits, with the only difference being that his limbs resembled talons that were shining with cold light. This territory lord also had a pair of wings. It was unknown where they were hiding because young Kai didn't even sense the slightest trace of their auras before now. The 3 territory lords weren't in a hurry to appear, seeming to be not worried that young Kai would escape. The seductive territory lord spoke up first. When the sirs asked us to stay here in case any humans decide to come back, I first thought they were being too careful, but now it seems that there are indeed some humans that are seeking death. The fang-toothed territory lord snorted lightly. We've waited here for 200 years. I think my body is about to become moldy. Human, you're unlucky today. On the other hand, the taloned territory lord frowned while warning, don't be careless. This human is an 8th order master, so he might not be easy to deal with. After letting out a snort, the fang-toothed territory lord retorted, so what if he's an 8th order human? It's not like we haven't killed any of them. Let me kill him while you 2 stand guard. Saying so, the fang-toothed territory lord charged at young Kai. Because he had a burly and bulky body, his actions seemed clumsy, but in fact, he was moving very fast, and his huge frame fell like a meteor, quickly approaching young Kai. The terrifying aura of a territory lord burst forth, causing the broken walls in the Great Pass to begin to creak. Meanwhile, the taloned territory lord fixed his eyes on young Kai, and even his eyes reflected the latter's figure. He was the fastest among these 3 territory lords, so he needed to be vigilant in case young Kai decided to activate whatever final seal was left on the 9th Order Master's corpse. Although they didn't know what this seal was or what it was for, the royal lords had specifically told them it was definitely something the 3 of them couldn't resist. Even they, as royal lords, might not be able to resist the power which was hidden inside that seal. Even after death, a 9th Order Master still couldn't be underestimated because the secret techniques those humans practiced often had unimaginable power. If young Kai really did exhibit any intentions of touching that corpse, the taloned territory lord had to stop him immediately. While watching young Kai's every action carefully, the taloned territory lord tried to think in young Kai's shoes and predict his next move. Just like he had said, an 8th Order Open Heaven Realm Master wasn't so easy to deal with. The territory lords had indeed killed many 8th Order Open Heaven Realm Masters outside the Primordial Heaven's Source Grand Restriction, but the territory lords had suffered huge losses as well. The number of fallen territory lords in that battle was 2 to 3 times higher than that of the enemy. Even he himself had been severely injured by a near-dead 8th Order Open Master. Though several hundred years had passed since that battle, he could still feel slight pain coming from his injuries whenever he thought about that scene. In this situation, this 8th Order human only had 2 possibilities for survival. One was activating the seal on the 9th Order Old Ancestor's corpse, while the other was to flee immediately. No matter how strong an 8th Order Master was, when faced with 3 territory lords, the only possible ending was death. What shocked the Taloned Territory Lord was that the somewhat excessively young-looking 8th Order Master didn't reveal the slightest bit of panic since they appeared. Instead, this human kept a saddened expression, which was naturally because of the death of his people and the destroyed Great Pass. Under that veil of sadness, however, was endless murderous intent. This human clearly had no intention of activating the seal on the corpse. The Taloned Territory Lord felt his heart sink and hurriedly warned the others, "Be careful." Right after he said that, he saw the 8th Order Open Heaven Realm Master lunging at his fellow Territory Lord with a vicious expression. The human was so fast that he left a blurred afterimage behind him, making it look like there were countless clones of him charging forward to kill. The Taloned Territory Lord felt his pupils shirk. "This speed, it's too fast for me to interfere." When the big and small figures clashed, the sound of bones breaking rang out, but the expected scenario of the small human being sent flying away did not appear. Instead, the figure being sent flying was the tall and strong fang-toothed Territory Lord. His chest had caved in, and his expression looked shocked, as if he couldn't believe that he was not a match for his enemy in a head-on confrontation. However, as the Territory Lord was sent flying, he still viciously punched his opponent. Yang Kai wasn't able to dodge that attack, or more precisely, he didn't intend to dodge, simply lifting his arm to guard himself. At the same moment, his other hand made a grabbing motion towards the void and the azure dragon spear appeared. With a flourish of the spear, numerous Dao strengths manifested, creating a kind of unstoppable torrent. Following that, the long spear pierced out. A soft, muffled sound came out, causing the Taloned Territory Lord's pupils to shrink to the size of needles as he felt the entire world suddenly freeze. Marshall Peak, Chapter 5436, Continuous Killings. Hong, star. At that moment, the fang-toothed Territory Lord that was sent flying out finally fell onto a ramshackle house, smashing the already toppling building to the ground. Drip, star. Drip, star. Fresh blood dripped down and splashed onto the ground, creating a beautiful blood flower. Time seemed to have stopped at this moment. Above Azure Void Pass's central square, Yang Kai held his spear with one arm, and on the spear was a curvaceous body. The spear had penetrated that figure, and black fresh blood was dripping from it. While the different Dao strengths intertwined, they created a strange balance above the figure pierced with the spear. However, the owner of the figure could feel that the balance was very weak and could be broken with just a slight change. Once the balance was broken, those Dao strengths would suddenly explode, and what awaited her would be her death. On the Azure Dragon Spear, the seductive Territory Lord looked at Yang Kai with a conflicted expression. Her eyes were wet, making her look pitiful, but she felt more disbelief than anything. It was as if she didn't expect that she, a Territory Lord, couldn't even stand a single spear thrust from her opponent. Her figure was smaller than the fang-toothed Territory Lord, so when the fang-toothed Territory Lord was charging forward, she used a secret technique to follow behind him and silently approach her enemy. These 3 Territory Lords never thought to look down on an 8th Order Open Heaven Realm Master, a lesson they learnt from fighting the humans on the battlefield outside the Primordial Heaven's Source Grand Restriction and in various places throughout the vast void. So, at that moment, though it looked like only the fang-toothed Territory Lord was attacking, it was actually a joint attack from all 3 Territory Lords. The seductive Territory Lord concealed herself behind her companion, while the Taloned Territory Lord intimidated the enemy with his sharp aura, distracting his attention with his focused divine sense. This wasn't the first time these 3 Territory Lords worked together. Back when they attacked Azure Void Pass, they used such techniques to kill several 8th Order Open Heaven Realm Masters. That was why the royal lord had specifically left them here, because they were strong enough to deal with any dangers that might arise. By coordinating with each other, these three hadn't made any mistakes and could be said to be unbeatable. However, they had encountered an anomaly this time. The fang-toothed territory lord was sent flying after a head-on clash, followed by the seductive territory lord being run through by a spear. Meanwhile, the taloned territory lord's pupils just shrank as he didn't dare to make a move. He could detect that the opponent still had an explosive force that had yet to be unleashed condensed inside that spear, so if he moved rashly, the seductive territory lord would immediately die. Although they were shocked at how powerful this 8th order human was, they had actually won. The seductive territory lord indeed looked quite pitiful at this moment as Yang Kai's spear was piercing her, but her efforts and sacrifices weren't in vain as her jade hand had pierced into Yang Kai's chest and grabbed his heart. She could feel the strong beating of his heart inside his chest in the palm of her hand. Just by tightening her grip, she would be able to crush this human's heart and kill him. However, she didn't do that. Instead, she silently looked into Yang Kai's eyes and suddenly smiled. "You're very strong. Such a strong 8th order open heaven realm master. I don't feel like killing him anymore." Black ink strength filled the air and flowed into Yang Kai's body. In an instant, the outside of Yang Kai's body was surrounded by black ink strength. She was going to corrupt this strong opponent with black ink strength and make him her black ink disciple. Though she was by no means weak, if she had such a strong black ink disciple protecting her, her strength would more than double. On the other hand, Yang Kai stayed put as if he were afraid of something. The black ink strength soon enveloped him, and even his eyes turned black. Success. The taloned territory lord, who was feeling nervous all this while, relaxed his breath as he was also reluctant to see his companion dying here. Now that the black ink strength had corrupted their enemy, their side would gain a strong helper, which was undoubtedly the best outcome of this situation. "Put me down," the seductive territory lord ordered gently as if she were sweet-talking her lover. "Yes." Yang Kai responded. At that moment, the seductive territory lord suddenly felt something wasn't right and immediately roared before trying to tighten her grip on Yang Kai's heart. But before she could crust her opponent's heart, she felt a mysterious strength suddenly erupt from inside her body. Right then, numerous Tao strengths ran rampant, rapidly expanding the seductive territory lord's curvaceous body into a ball before exploding it. Black blood fell like rain, and pieces of flesh flew everywhere. The seductive territory lord's body exploded into a pretty-looking blood flower. That sudden turn of events shocked the taloned territory lord so much that he turned pale. It was then that he realized that his enemy wasn't afraid of being corrupted by black ink strength. At that point, Yang Kai had stealthily appeared by his side, and with a sweep of his spear, it transformed into a huge shadow that slashed down at his head. With a roar, the taloned territory lord channeled his black ink strength into his claws and wings, instantly turning them into weapons as he battled with Yang Kai. Fresh blood flew everywhere from both Yang Kai and the taloned territory lord. The battle looked even from the outside, but the taloned territory lord felt his blood run cold. After their initial clash, he knew he wasn't a match for his opponent, and the only reason this 8th order human was being wounded was because he completely gave up defending himself to kill him faster. In just 3 breaths of time, the two figures separated. While panting heavily, the taloned territory lord had a shocked expression on his face while sporting hundreds of injuries of all sizes all over his body, leaving almost no place unscarred. It wouldn't have mattered if that was all though, but these injuries all contained some strange power that affected his ability to use his black ink strength, which made him continuously grow weaker. At that moment, an angry roar sounded, and a huge figure charged over from the side and instantly appeared behind Yang Kai before spreading his arms wide and closing them while approaching Yang Kai. It was the fang-toothed territory lord who had finally regained consciousness and came to help. He was still a little confused as to why one of his companions wound up severely injured while the other died during the short moment he was knocked away. All he knew was that he and his companions had greatly underestimated this human 8th order master. Just as he was about to slap his hands and crush his enemy, the fang-toothed territory lord suddenly felt a strange power surging in the air and surprisingly found that no matter how he tried to bring his palms together, he couldn't shorten the distance between them. At this instant, The space between his palms seemed to be infinitely stretching. This scene shocked him even more. While he was distracted, the Eighth Order Master had already disappeared, and a grunt and roar came from the other side. Raising his head to look over, the fang-toothed territory lord felt his heart jump as he watched his taloned companion being madly beaten up by the Eighth Order Master like a sandbag. The space over there seemed warped, distorted beyond recognition, causing the two figures on the other side to appear occasionally elongated or shortened like they were reflections in a broken mirror. Black blood spewed everywhere, and the taloned territory lord seemed to be unable to resist the relentless thrusts of Yang Kai's spear. Many principles and Dao strengths were being activated by Yang Kai and turned into killing power. Noticing the situation, the fang-toothed territory lord howled madly before dashing over to help his companion. They came here as a trio, but now one of them was dead. If another one of them fell, they might be completely wiped out. Having never encountered such a terrifying foe before, the fang-toothed territory lord thought that all the other Eighth Order Masters they had previously killed were simply incomparable to the one before him. Despite the fact that his aura wasn't stronger than any of the other Eighth Order Open Heaven Realm Masters, this human had control over some various kinds of strengths that were exceptionally difficult to deal with. They had seen such strengths used by other human masters, but those humans would only be proficient in 1 to 2 of them, so they weren't so difficult to counter. There had never been a human who could wield so many different kinds of Dao strengths. These strengths weren't much on their own, but when they all intertwined in one place, they seemed to produce unpredictable effects. After madly running halfway to help his companion, the fang-toothed territory lord suddenly stopped and immediately turned around before charging out of Azure Void Pass's broken walls and into the void's depths. This couldn't be helped as he saw the taloned territory lord's head blown to pieces by Yang Kai before he could even arrive to offer assistance. In just 30 breaths of time, even with 3 territory lords working together, 2 of them had been killed, leaving only 1 alive. Would he be able to keep his life if he stayed there? Before the fang-toothed territory lord could escape Azure Void Pass though, he suddenly stopped and looked up with a heavy expression. Standing tall above the crumbling walls was a figure with a long spear that was pointing down at him as black blood dripped from his hand. That figure was glaring at the fang-toothed territory lord with cold eyes. That figure was the Eighth Order Open Heaven Realm Master, who was supposed to be behind him. The fang-toothed territory lord felt a truly bitter taste in his mouth. However, he soon composed himself because after killing both his companions, this human must have also suffered severe injuries. The most obvious sign of that was the human's aura, which felt wavered between strong and weak, clearly indicating the other party was not in top form anymore. I might be able to defeat him. I can't let him intimidate me with his aura alone after he killed 2 territory lords. If I don't fight, I might really die here. I can kill him. I must kill him. The fang-toothed territory lord roared as black ink strength poured out of him like a tsunami, making his figure become even bulkier. With determined eyes, his aura flared to the point that it felt like he could kill the enemy with 1 punch, even if the one standing before him was a Ninth Order Open Heaven Realm Master. Then, he charged at Yang Kai. Following that, the 2 figures entangled together, their fight drifting from Azure Void Pass out into the void. Attacks were exchanged back and forth as the 2 were locked in an intense battle. At that moment, the fang-toothed territory lord was indeed very happy. He discovered that, just like what he had expected, this Eighth Order human's strength really had fallen after killing his 2 companions. Even though the enemy was still very strong, this human couldn't kill him with his current strength. Sensing this, the fang-toothed territory lord immediately changed tactics. Since the opponent seemed to be fighting with all his might, wanting to end this battle as quickly as possible, he would focus on defense instead. He then decided that he would drag this battle out until the human couldn't hold on any longer. An hour, 6 hours, half a day later. The battle was still as intense as ever, but the fang-toothed territory lord didn't feel as relaxed as before, and his expression was gradually becoming heavy. As the battle gradually became disadvantageous for him, he was able to discover the root of the problem as well. The strength that this human Eighth Order Open Heaven Realm Master was exerting was slowly increasing. In other words, the human was slowly becoming stronger. This human. What's wrong with him? The fang-toothed territory lord could never have expected that the opponent before him had only just broken through to 8th Order Open Heaven realm recently and was considered newly advanced. Yang Kai had spent quite some time cultivating inside the Great Sea, so his foundation was extremely stable and his heritage wasn't distinguishable from veteran 8th Order Open Heaven realm masters, so the thought that he had only just reached this realm was hard to imagine. Martial Peak, Chapter 5437, Azure Void Remnants. Under normal circumstances, there were two criteria for determining if an 8th Order Open Heaven realm master was a veteran or newly promoted. One of them was that the heritage of that person's small universe had achieved a certain threshold. Under normal circumstances, even 2,000 years after a cultivator advanced to the 8th Order Open Heaven realm, they could still not be counted as a veteran. 2,000 years was basically just sufficient for an 8th Order Open Heaven realm master to stabilize their foundation and be able to freely exert their strength. The second criterion was one's experience in battling and killing enemies. No matter how strong one's heritage was, if they didn't have any battle experience, they would be restricted in battle and wouldn't be able to bring out their full strength. Among all the human 8th Order Open Heaven realm masters on the Black Ink battlefield, there were only a few newly advanced 8th Order masters, while the rest were veterans. After they had advanced to the 8th Order Open Heaven realm, they continued cultivating while simultaneously battling the Black Ink clan, slowly training themselves to master and enhance their strength. Therefore, situations like being unable to bring out their complete strength essentially never occurred. However, Yang Kai was an exception. He had a breakthrough to the 8th Order Open Heaven realm inside the temporal rivers of the Great Sea celestial phenomenon and then cultivated there for 2,000 years before exiting. After Yang Kai left the Great Sea celestial phenomenon, he battled the sheep-headed royal lord and even decapitated him, but during that fight, he had constantly been going all out in a desperate struggle as there was a huge difference between his and the royal lord's true strength, even using 4 soul-rending thorns, causing himself to become delirious due to his injured soul. In the end, he didn't even know how he killed the royal lord as he was already holding onto his head when he came to his senses. This time, it was different. With his current strength, a territory lord wasn't too strong nor too weak, but rather just right for him to use as a polishing stone. After he killed 2 territory lords one after the other, Yang Kai wasn't in a hurry to end the 3rd territory lord's life. Instead, he wanted to borrow this territory lord's strength to hone and familiarize himself with his newfound strength. The many grand Dao strengths he had refined inside the Great Sea, especially, were unfamiliar to him. If he could hone them during an intense battle, Yang Kai could gain better control over them and would be able to use them more effectively. That was why the fang-toothed territory lord felt that the Yang Kai's strength was growing. Yang Kai now controlled so many Dao strengths that he wasn't able to skillfully wield them. He desperately needed an opponent to battle against. Therefore, he chose to quickly kill 2 territory lords, even if it meant getting hurt in the process. Another half a day later, the fang-toothed territory lord felt despair because this battle, which started with them being on par with each other, then turned against him slightly, was now approaching the point where he was completely overwhelmed. His heart was filled with bitterness. The battle had now made a complete turnaround. Yang Kai's attacks were calm and unhurried as he was still honing his strength, while on the other hand, the fang-toothed territory lord was fighting back desperately as he knew that the longer the battle continued, the stronger his opponent would become. Once this human had reached a certain limit, he would die. But in battle, sometimes fighting with everything one had simply wasn't enough. Another half a day passed, and the fang-toothed territory lord's aura had already weakened beyond recognition. His body was covered in every kind of wound imaginable, and his black ink strength was leaking out from all those injuries. If this went on for much longer, there was a high likelihood that his strength would regress from that of a territory lord to a feudal lord. At this moment, he felt envious of his 2 companions because at least their deaths were swift. Meanwhile, he was like a piece of meat being slowly shaved by a dull knife, a torturous process for both his body and mind. Knowing that he was destined to die today, the fang-toothed territory lord made a decision and completely gave up on defending before brazenly charging towards Yang Kai in a final, desperate struggle. After a dozen breaths, a long spear pierced into his eye socket, and numerous Tao strengths surged into his brain, grinding it into a paste. His originally fierce-looking expression gradually turned peaceful, feeling a sense of relief as the light in his eyes gradually dimmed. Yang Kai withdrew his spear and frowned slightly because he was quite dissatisfied with his current strength. He didn't consider the battle with the sheep-headed royal lord because he had completely lost consciousness during that fight, relying almost solely on his instincts to kill the enemy. After the battle with these 3 territory lords, he discovered his shortcomings. Back when he was a 7th Order master, he could crush those in the same realm without any difficulty. No matter how strong a feudal lord was, they were no better than children before him and had no chance of fighting back. But now that he had advanced to the 8th Order Open Heaven realm, his situation couldn't compare to the glory he had when in the 7th Order Open Heaven realm. During this battle, Yang Kai had paid quite a large price to kill the seductive Territory Lord and Taloned Territory Lord. It was even so for the fang-toothed Territory Lord he killed last. Although he had intended to use this Territory Lord to hone his strength, the time he took to finish the latter off was less than satisfactory. According to the intelligence he obtained during the previous crusade, these 3 Territory Lords were considered innate Territory Lords, ones who were spawned directly from a high-rank Black Ink nest. Therefore, they were stronger than those Black Ink clansmen who advanced to become Territory Lords through their own cultivation. Innate Territory Lords were already the strongest among all Territory Lords. In other words, Yang Kai might still be invincible among his peers, but was far from being able to crush those in his realm. But after giving it another thought, Yang Kai understood that he had only been in the 8th Order Open Heaven realm for 2,000 years, so the heritage in his small universe hadn't reached anywhere near its maximum yet. Once he reached the peak of the 8th Order Open Heaven realm, it wouldn't be a problem to crush his peers. On the other hand, he also discovered the biggest problem he was having now. He had too many Tao strengths under his control. To escape from the Great Sea celestial phenomenon, he had no choice but to absorb those undercurrents, which increased his attainment in many, many different grand Taos. It seemed now that he had absorbed and refined too many undercurrents, so his foundation, which comprised of all the different grand Taos, was just too broad. With the ability to wield so many Tao strengths, it meant he had more means of dealing with different enemies, which was a good thing. However, Yang Kai was finding it difficult to integrate all these varied Tao strengths into a coherent force. While he had comprehension of many Tao strengths, he did not know how to harmonize them to enhance his power and could only clumsily smash them all together at the moment. Also, he had a vague feeling that if he could properly gather all these Tao strengths into one, the power he could exert would definitely experience an earth-shattering change. In his current situation, he could only think about these things because, among the variety of Tao strengths, he did have attainments in some of them, but none were comparable to his mastery of the Tao of space, Tao of time, and Spear Tao. How could he gather all these Tao strengths into one when he hadn't even comprehended the true mysteries behind them? Even with just the Tao of space and Tao of time, which he had focused on cultivating over many centuries, Yang Kai still hadn't managed to achieve a perfect fusion. Shaking his head to clear out such distracting thoughts, Yang Kai turned to look into the distance and stared for a moment before shouting, "Come out." From the cover of the messy battlefield, a few figures slowly emerged from the shadows. Each of them looked at Yang Kai with shocked expressions on their faces. They had watched the battle just now, and the scene where an innate Territory Lord was slowly being tortured to death was quite an eye-opener for them. Great evolutions. Yang Kai greets fellow martial brothers and sisters. Yang Kai bowed. He had already discovered that people were spying on him while he was battling the fang-toothed Territory Lord and could feel that they weren't very strong, nor were there many of them. Clearly, they had been attracted here by the fallout from the battle. Since these visitors kept themselves hidden nearby and showed no intention of coming out, Yang Kai couldn't tell whether they were friends or foes. It was not until this moment that he was certain that these observers were humans. Its senior brother Yang, one of the 7th Order Open Heaven Realm Masters, was elated after hearing Yang Kai announce his identity. They were originally worried that the 8th Order Open Heaven Realm Master that killed those Black Ink Territory Lords might be corrupted by Black Ink strength, which was the reason why they didn't show themselves even after Yang Kai had killed the fang-toothed Territory Lord. But upon learning his identity, those worries disappeared. This couldn't be helped, because every human soldier in every great pass knew Yang Kai's name. He was the one who brought them purifying light, so it was well known he wasn't afraid of being invaded by black ink strength. All those below the Ninth Order had the possibility of being corrupted by black ink strength, but Yang Kai was an exception. Meanwhile, the others also revealed happy expressions as they hurriedly approached Yang Kai. When they saw Yang Kai's face, they could finally determine his identity. Yang Kai also thought these people looked quite familiar, and after taking a closer look, he stated hesitantly, "You're the senior brother who was always on guard duty at the space array." Having visited Azure Void Pass several times, Yang Kai naturally recognized the Seventh Order masters that guarded the Great Pass hyperspace array, and he was sure that this person before him was one of them. That Seventh Order master seemed like he was about to cry from joy and choked out, "Sun Marrow greets senior brother Yang." Then, Yang Kai swept his gaze over the others, and his face fell. "Are you all that remains of the Azure Void army?" Sun Marrow composed himself before answering, "There are a few other fellow brothers and sisters, but they are currently in hiding. We came here because we sensed there was a battle happening and wanted to investigate." "How many of you are there?" Yang Kai asked. Sun Marrow replied in an astringent voice, "Less than 1,000. Feeling his face twitching slightly, Yang Kai felt as if his heart was being torn out. Azure Void Pass should have had 30,000 human masters stationed here, about the same as Blue Sky Pass back then. After the attack on the Royal City in the Azure Void Theater, they undoubtedly suffered some casualties, but there should have still been more than 20,000 troops here during the Second Crusade. Less than 1,000 of the original 20,000 survived, while even the old ancestor died in battle. It was nothing less than tragic. "Senior brother Yang, are there still any Black Ink clansmen in the inner sanctum?" Sun Marrow asked. Yang Kai shook his head, "I didn't make a thorough check, but there shouldn't be any left. Since the 3 territory lords hidden here had been killed, any remaining Black Ink clansmen would have appeared by now, even if it was just to try to flee." Hearing that, Sun Marrow felt relieved. If that's the case, then Division Commander Huang and the others can be saved. Yang Kai frowned. "Why did you say that?" Sun Marrow explained, "Division Commander Huang and some fellow brothers and sisters were invaded by black ink strength. Since we ran out of purifying black ink pills and didn't have access to any purifying light, they were unable to eliminate that black ink strength. Previously, Division Commander Hai led some troops here, intending to recover the purifying black ink battleship. Unfortunately, there hasn't been any news from them since they left, so we assumed they ran into trouble. Quite a number of the remaining soldiers gathered here had been stained by black ink strength and had been suppressing the black ink strength inside their bodies over the years using various methods, but every once in a while, one of them could not hold on any longer and would have to commit suicide. The battle 200 years ago not only destroyed Azure Void Pass, but also cut off the human supply lines. Even the purifying black ink pills and evil purging divine spears were all used up by now. Although there were still alchemists among their ranks, it was impossible for them to refine spirit pills without any spirit herbs or materials. Division Commander Huang Xiong was an 8th Order Open Heaven Realm Master, so even if he was invaded by black ink strength, he could still hold on for a time, but if too long passed, he would also find it difficult to cope. Now, the only thing that could save them was the purifying black ink battleship that lay in the inner sanctum. Purifying light might still be sealed inside the battleship, so the only way they could survive was to extract it from the Great Pass. You're tuning in to the Celestial War YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.